Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the June 17th, 2024 meeting of the Richmond Selectboard. Before we begin with our warned agenda, would anybody either attending in person or virtually care to make a public comment? Not seeing anyone. Moving on. Josh, board, any additions or deletions to tonight's agenda?
David, I did have one request to add approval of a liquor application, liquor license, but based on recent open meeting law training, we shouldn't add action items to the agenda the day of. So if
Unless they're emergencies.
unless they're emergencies, if it's okay with the select board, I think we could add it to next week's special meeting as a fairly quick agenda item.
Seems reasonable.
Okay. Kara.
Mind, I have a couple of agenda items that ask if you could move them up, if that's possible. The three agenda items, I'd like to see if they can get moved up in front of G, R, J, L, and P.
So it's the update from
Together now?
All Together Now. Follow up on the special meeting for creation of special projects, reserve fund, and administrative staffing follow-up. Anybody have any?
I have no objection.
Okay.
Fine.
Well, my only concern is I know that I think Stephanie Hartsfield and maybe a couple others might be attending for the Altogether Now. And if we move that up, they might.
I don't mind moving it up, Josh, until when they get here.
Okay.
I can amend that request to when they're here, when they're present.
Susan Wells also has her hand.
Susan, go ahead.
I object. I've been pushed back. This would be the third time that my issues have been pushed back. Just FYI.
Okay.
So maybe we shouldn't.
That's valid.
Yeah.
David?
Bard? Oh, hi.
I was just gonna ask if we could, Amy Gifford, sorry. If we could put A, D, E, and F together potentially?
As all pedestrian.
Yeah,
related.
makes sense.
Okay.
What do we do? Bump B and C? Put it at the beginning?
Yeah. E also.
Let's just throw them randomly.
Okay, I'm getting confused.
Yeah.
Sorry, Amy, what'd you say? D,
D, E, and F?
D, E, and F.
Are you folks planning on moving that up before the D and K presentation?
No, I think moving A down.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so we do, because I know we have consultants ready to go for the scoping study.
Why don't we, that would be my recommendation, and rather than moving D, E, and F up, we move A down and cluster the pedestrian related items.
So it's B, C, A, D, E?
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
finally understand. So are we ready for the presentation of the Western Gateway Scoping Study?
I am. I'll be wanting to share my screen, but otherwise I'm good to go. Thanks.
Okay. Should be able to share now.
Yeah.
Yep,
You
we can
see the cover? Okay. Well, great. Ready to go then?
Go ahead.
Okay, good. Thanks. My name is Dan Malik. I'm a landscape architect and certified planner with Du Bois and King down here in Randolph office. And it's been my privilege over the last year plus to work on this Richmond Gateway scoping study. And we've come to about the 2 or 3 yard line, but with some critical input necessary from the select board to finalize what's called the preferred alternative. And I know you received a draft of this in your packets at the end of last week. We're continuing to revise, update, find the occasional typo, but any other input that you have this evening as I step through, I have just about a half hour on the agenda, and I'll do my best not to go over it, but we're here at your pleasure. Any other comments you have to make this document as useful as possible for Richmond? We'll go into the final document over the next week or two, and then we'll hand off, of course, a fully finished packet, full appendices and everything to the town to move forward. So with that, I will get right to it, and it might be useful to both look at the heading as well as the table of contents. This is an active transportation project federally funded through the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission with funds from Richmond. It generally is looking at a pathway for a variety of users between Richmond Village through to the Park and Ride, past the interchange to Riverview Commons. And so while a path of that kind can have any number of recreation and social functions, and when the funding of this was conceived, it was conceived as a transportation project under the VTrans scoping study format. And so you can see here there are many types of active transportation: biking, walking, using a wheelchair, mobility device, scooter, skateboarding, and more. This was actually a definition brought to us by the Vermont Department of Health, which is very concerned, of course, with both transportation and recreation, but that was great input. And the goal of this project is to provide a path that is safe and easy to use for all ages and abilities. And this has been studied for some time. There was a significant scoping study back in 2014 that also looked into any number of routes, at least as far as the Park and Ride or interchange or down onto Route 2. We're heading over to Riverview Commons on this one, and that's a significant improvement in many respects. It opens up opportunities for funding, but it also recognizes that the environmental justice component of a transportation corridor like this is critical to bring the folks in that neighborhood toward the village, toward the schools, toward recreation and job opportunities, to the Park and Ride and that transportation hub, et cetera. And so the table of contents you see here shows the breadth of this document, not only in terms of what's required through the VTrans scoping study formula, if you will, but really what we looked at. And we built upon those earlier studies. We didn't reinvent the wheel for a lot of the existing conditions you'll see, for example, but the design development and the design concepts, the public outreach and engagement process, that was all new and updated. And we brought some of the ideas from earlier studies, updated, revised them based on what we heard and meetings we had with various entities and stakeholders in the community to create this document for you. Any questions on that overview going forward before I just jump right into some of the content? Okay.
I think we're good.
Thank you. So a scoping study, again, a scoping study, as you probably know, looks at technical feasibility. It looks at public support, and it assesses cost. And we'll get to the cost, and it's not insignificant, certainly, but what this document also does is recommend funding sources, and there are quite a few, and the CCRPC is a great resource to help guide Richmond through that project. But as you can imagine, some of the physical requirements, technical requirements, and some of the innovations of the particular, what has emerged as a recommended or potential or preferred based on community input route has some innovations that will also bring up costs, but we'll get to that. In the scoping study, so I was looking at those three things: community support and input, which was assessed through surveys and meetings; technical feasibility, which was assessed through looking at both desktop resources, but also a lot of on-the-ground work and talking to some of our engineers here at Du Bois and King; and then at least an estimate at a planning level of potential costs. Again, building on prior work, here are some of the other studies: your own town plan, your own bike, walk, and trails plan. That was in 2 phases over the last several years. That earlier 2014 study is number 1. Some of the wetlands mapping that's been done very recently with your district wetlands ecologist, Tina Heath, and of course, some of the regional Chittenden County work as well. A lot of the existing conditions we did take from earlier studies. This is a land use map, though, that I just updated today based on current GIS and Agency of Natural Resources property ownership. It helps give context of what the destinations and the starting points are for an active transportation corridor along this route. And you see each of these, and you can spend more time with the report, why this information matters. You know, a lot of these VTrans studies, yes, you need to do A, B, C, D, E. We wanted to make sure Richmond also was able to, someone just picking up this document, well, how does this fit in with the bigger picture of Richmond making investment decisions or any kind of policy decision moving forward? Similarly, topography, critical along this stretch, along the general Route 2 corridor between Richmond Village, the Park and Ride, and Riverview Commons. You have some of those drainage gullies coming down, significant topography and hills, and that significantly impacts what kinds of solutions we might propose as viable, and of course, the costs, and an understanding of that topography is critical. The next step in this process would be to go to an engineer, get funding, and actually have an engineering firm develop these designs into construction documents. And so at a planning level, we need to understand what the parameters are. But you also see one of the appendices we created is sort of a swath of step-by-step 39 slides along the entire corridor of the types of things the engineers will be looking at. Utility is obviously critical, whether it's aligning certain projects with this work to realize cost efficiencies, or if there's site disturbance, or understanding that a utility pole might need to be moved in order to facilitate the creation of a path. That utility understanding is critical. And if service were interrupted for any reason, for the construction of a path, it's good to understand that as far in advance as possible. These are maps actually from the 2014 work, but a lot of these have not changed. Natural features, although we've updated the wetland maps in 2023, understanding the floodplains and that they're a dynamic system are important from a planning perspective, though some of this earlier 2023 or 2014 rather, information was useful. Making choices to reduce impacts is part of why an earlier route from 2014 that explored the southern side of Route 2 was not pursued further because of some of the wetlands and floodplain impacts along the Winooski River corridor, for example. Here's some of the wetland mapping that actually happened in 2022. Arrowwood Environmental. When you see the blue here, you probably recognize these as hyperlinks. I could go and go right to the Richmond website, for example, and find more information about this. And so when you receive the final document, we'll be sending paper, but we'll also be giving you all the PDF. And so there are quite a number of hyperlinks throughout this entire document, including for the funding. And the roadway characteristics. It's important to understand the right-of-way. It's critical to understand the relationship between Route 2 and the rail corridor. And we have a little more in-depth information about that. It's understanding how a right-of-way where there is a legal opportunity to construct something still interacts with the private properties, for example, along the north side of Route 2. It's not just an issue of ownership, it's an issue of respect. But having a baseline of knowing where that right-of-way width of 60 feet, for example, ends is vital. And roadway data, it's part of the justification of this project to understand daily trips by motor vehicles and therefore the need for non-motorized transportation or a wheelchair or an e-bike, for example, that might be off-road. It's important to understand crash data to help justify potentially funding and the need for this project. So that's why we put it into this report. And then, of course, community input. We had two significant public surveys. One after what's called the local concerns phase, when we're just starting to understand the issues at play and some of the existing conditions. We put out to folks, do you, for example, and I'll skip to the survey, but do you currently walk along this route? If there were a route, would you use it? And where do you live? Where do you work, volunteer, go to school? Do you have reliable access to a car? And how important are these project goals? In the lower right here, convenience, safety, keeping town costs low, minimizing projects' environmental impact. Obviously here, the second from the left, safety, not surprisingly, had the highest ratio of very important to not or somewhat important. And that's good for us to help not only get our head around the options, but also communicate any solutions to people as meeting their desires. We also had 3 targeted focus groups, one with the Cemetery Commission at that critical bend in Route 2, one with representative staff from the schools, and one with members of the public who live along Route 2 and might have specific interests or concerns about a project going along the frontages of their property. And so we also had 2 meetings in conjunction with the local concerns phase. And then as the concepts were developed, a design concepts meeting that also went along with the second survey, several meetings of the Transportation Committee, several meetings throughout the course of the project with an internal steering committee, additional phone calls. And throughout this time, the meetings and updates were advertised on Front Porch Forum, Times Inc., and there's a project website that was live for the entirety of the project. Brian Davis of the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission also spread flyers throughout the Riverview Commons neighborhood during the survey phase, the design concept survey phase, to try to solicit input. And here you see a summary of some of the feedback. Obviously, safety is critical, impacts to natural features. The school had particular interests potentially because this could be a route up to their campus, as well, however, of security and access control issues and wanting to make sure the route was accessible. Local concern survey I mentioned, design concept survey. We'll talk about 2 main concepts that emerged out of this process. And so we're asking people about what we're calling a blue route and a green route, no preference or neither. In any scoping study, a no build option remains on the table throughout the course of the study. And we'll talk more about that. And then in the lower right, we ask that same question as before: safety of walking, convenience, opportunities for rest, environmental impacts, and costs. And here we have a graphic which you can take more time with if you wish, what we heard during the meetings and how it translated into our work. For example, local concerns connecting the elementary and middle schools to the Village and Riverview Commons was something that we heard during that meeting. And so we reached out not only to that schools forum, but also to the superintendent, Alberghini, on a phone call and asked him as well about his thoughts about to what extent can we show a route from an active transportation corridor up to the schools. I'll just pause there before we get on to the purpose and need. If you have any questions about that community engagement or outreach or existing conditions part of the process.
Kara?
Sure, I'll ask a couple. I don't know if that can be heard, but
Yep.
you can hear okay?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Jay. A couple of questions. You said there was significant topographical and topography in hills. How is that then ADA compliant for wheelchairs? Or have you built in longer distance to have to lift up the grade to flatten out those steep inclines?
Sure. A lot of what you can do is use retaining walls to build into a slope. So you have a 10-foot wide, which is the recommended minimum flat surface, but that is cost, building a retaining wall into a slope. In some cases, such as along the cemetery, not only do you have those great sugar maples and you have a tight shoulder, you have potentially, according to the Cemetery Commission, some unmarked interred bodies as well, very close to the corridor. And so that's a combination of both topography and a constraint from that reason. And so across the gullies, you can extend the existing culverts so they're further out and then build over them. So that's sort of a perpendicular, if you will, to the direction of the slope. But it is a fair amount of retaining wall, and understanding that while the topography is an asset from a scenic point of view, and we want to, in some cases, bring people closer to it, it's a cost consideration and a technical feasibility consideration. There was nothing about the slopes that we've discovered during this process that would preclude the building of those retaining walls. But as we move forward into engineering the specifics of that, and we estimated the size of the wall and length that would be required in our cost estimates, but the specifics would really have to be explored further. So
Right.
part of the understanding is anticipating that next step.
I don't know if you quite answered the question that I'm looking for. Say coming
Okay.
out of Richmond where the sidewalk ends.
Yep.
And you were going to go down that hill to exit out of Richmond. Is the slope of that hill ADA compliant for a wheelchair?
Okay, thank you. I was thinking the topography coming down the hill, like to Route 2. Thanks for clarifying. Most
Oh, you're
stretches of it,
talking from the school? You were talking, are you talking, where are you coming down the hill from to Route 2?
for example, from the Interstate 89 corridor down the hill or up to the school or through Willis Hill Preserve, you're just thinking even along Route 2 itself, adjacent to it, those slopes coming out, for example.
I'm
And so
sorry, I'm confused. Are we going from the school through the Willis property, or are we going the extension of Route 2 from the village sidewalks? I'm sorry.
They explore both.
Oh,
sure,
you're exploring both of the, okay.
the main,
Thank you so much.
yeah, the main corridor, the main idea of the project is to connect the village to the park and ride to Riverview Commons. If we're able to do that, in talking with the school and others, the idea was, wouldn't it be excellent to be able to connect up to the school? And
Okay.
so that was something, for example, that we heard from people. And so what we did is have targeted outreach with the schools to find out if they had suggestions, desires, concerns. But the main route, more or less, goes along the Route 2 corridor. So if we were coming out of Richmond Village and then it does head down the hill, we would have to make sure that the path does not exceed that 8% slope. And if it were, and if you needed railings, for example, on one side, if you needed to have areas where it's flat every 200 feet, I think, to comply with ADA standards, those would all have to be looked at very carefully during the engineering phase. But by and large, much of the route is fairly flat and already within specifications for ADA.
But your study right now hasn't done the feasibility of the estimation of a true ADA yet. That'd be an engineering level. Like, you didn't confirm that you were only 8% all the way.
We confirmed the feasibility that it could be done, but to
Okay.
actually find out how to do that would require the engineering work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And a couple more questions. One on your, actually, one more question.
Yeah.
About your public surveys. How many, and I couldn't see from where I was sitting, how many of each survey were completed?
Yep. The local concern survey, the first survey, 149 respondents. The second, the design concept, I think a total of 94 responses.
And were those all Richmond residents?
Sure. The design concepts, or let's start with the local concerns. I'll see if I can zoom in and make it a little bigger for you.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Right. So this is the where do you live question for that first, that had a total of 149 responses. Along the Route 2 corridor is a very small slice of probably about 4%. In Riverview Commons, similarly, in the village area, about a third, that's the yellow. More than half lived elsewhere in Richmond, and 6% lived outside Richmond. Now, it's possible that they might use this if they live outside Richmond. They might park at the park and ride and use it to get into the village, for example. But that's that. And for the design concept survey, I don't have that here. The full document will have all of the survey results and the voluminous feedback where people wrote in. There's always a question of, do you have any additional comments or suggestions? And usually at least 2/3, and in this case, that was the case, also wrote out their thoughts and ideas about the project. For example, some other themes you actually see here as part of the local concern survey, that perhaps if Richmond were to pursue a path, it should connect among park areas. If Richmond were to spend money on a transportation project, perhaps it should be spent elsewhere. We also heard that this is a great idea. I can't wait for it to happen. And that I wish we could do more of this throughout town. And then here you also see a theme that was repeated in these open-ended comments. The bottom of the bullet points on the left was to include a path to the middle and the elementary schools, but all those will be in the final documents. As I recall, the mix of where people live was pretty similar to the second survey. Surveys aren't everything, and that percentage of the population, while over 100, 150, given everything else that folks had to do, we also had paper copies at the library and at town center available in a Dropbox throughout the duration of the survey. As planners and landscape architects, we need to recognize that whether it's coming to a meeting or answering a survey or participating in some other way is not possible for a lot of people. There are a lot of people who are single parents taking care of kids, or a parent, or working 2 jobs. And we need to be putting our planners' hats on for them as well. And so to the extent that this is representative data and feedback about any number of things, we have to kind of weight that in our process along with the other technical aspects of it. But it's useful to get a sense of trends and directions as far as that goes.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And my last and final question is the Weston in the title. Is that how the surveys went out about Weston's gateway scoping? So nobody really knows what we're talking about. It's confusing. If we're talking bike path or pedestrian recreational path, why don't we call this recreational path? I'm just confused why it's not easy to understand what this is on an agenda, or it could be hard to understand if somebody's sending a survey or asking for input on a Weston gateway scoping.
That's a really great point. Thank you. Though I don't know if the word Western doesn't matter. The fact that it's a scoping study doesn't tell a lot of people very much information. And I'll talk with even Brian Davis after this and ask if we shouldn't in fact change the title of the document. Because unless you know what a scoping study is, and I wouldn't if I didn't do this, you're right. That's a great point. Thanks for making it.
Heidi?
Heidi Borden. I do have a question in regards to the outreach to the people. I'm
Yeah.
wondering how you went about reaching out to the people that own property on that Route 2.
That started before I became involved in this process, but I believe it was through the CCRPC, specifically through mail, and I think in some cases knocking on doors. I reached out to people to invite them to the forum and then invite them to offer any comment possible to the group. But I can follow up with you to find out exactly how that was done, especially if it didn't reach everybody. That would be something to know.
That I will say, both Peter and I did not receive that, and we do own property on Route 2. And I understand
Thank you.
that this project has been going on since 2014, and we're just kind of hearing about this year. Is that correct? Is that what
There
I'm
have been
understanding?
multiple projects looking at a transportation corridor between the village and points west. This is completely separate from the one in 2014, even if it built on some of that same information. This particular project's been going on since the end of 2022. It doesn't make it any better, the fact, though, that you didn't hear about it. So I'm sorry to hear that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So David, and Dan, it may not be obvious, but I'm looking at some of the people in the room and contemplating what was mentioned from the end of the current sidewalk on West Main Street or Route 2.
Yeah.
And that ends, and then there's a hill, a slope on one side, the railroad property on the other side, and it's kind of a steep slope. So that's both a vertical and horizontal pinch point, presumably. And then passing all the way around the corner past the cemetery is the other sort of slope problem that you mentioned. So in the past, people have looked at that and been daunted. So that's why I think that you're getting some questions about how that could be addressed in terms of both feasibility and cost. When I driven by that very many times, I've contemplated how much earth would have to be moved and retaining walls moved to extend from the recently repaved Route 2 shoulder what, 12 feet, 10 feet? Whatever it is from the current curb, which would be fairly substantial given the current appearance of the roadway and surrounding topography. So I think that's why people are sort of pondering this, including some property owners along the way who are in the room.
Thank you, Bart. There's also the slope near the doggy daycare going toward Mobile.
You're absolutely right.
That's a great point. And coming out of the sidewalk from the village, we'd want to continue the sidewalk until that last home that's right there in line and then widen out. There are places where 10 may not be possible. And along the cemetery, unless we were to work with property owners and go overland, up sort of toward the school and down past Willis, through Willis Hill Preserve, the only viable solution without going through the cemetery itself, which I think has some legal challenges to it, is to actually go onto a shoulder with flexible delineators. And we recommend that that possibility be tested with an organization like Local Motion. But for that 700 feet or so while you're going around the curve, it still has a narrow shoulder. So to be able to traverse the north side of Route 2 right now, given the cemetery, given the degree of legal discussions with property owners, we're recommending that that Route 2 shoulder be separated, delineated as part of the design concepts.
Okay.
But
Just
your
to
larger point about working with the property owners along Route 2, communicating, sorry to hear that it didn't fully happen. Any project going forward, that needs to be the foundation of design.
Just to clarify, the flexible delineators, those are those plastic, impactable, they won't damage a car, but they stand there delineating the pedestrian right of way from the road right of way. We're talking about those things the car can plow into, but otherwise they serve as a visible, this is where you should stop kind of thing.
Yes. And that along with, there's a project recently tested on Spear Street in Shelburne, where they use the flexible delineators at a wider stripe. And that is what we're talking about. And so we could try those. They're relatively low cost to install. They are not ideal. And I won't pretend they are from a safety standpoint compared to a buffered off-road path. But again, given what we understand of the challenges and the extent to which coordination has happened with property owners, we didn't want to show a permanent route either through the cemeteries or Willis Hill Preserve or some of the other properties along that way. But we do show how that could feasibly be done in kind of a dotted line format in this report, should that be explored further.
If I may, I'm going to throw in one more thing.
Mhm.
Over the years, not that many years, but over the years I've been on the select board, I've heard and seen a lot of information about how the number one economic inequity in Richmond is the lack of access of the people in Riverview Commons to the park and ride. That we take it for granted that if we, with cars, we can get to the park and ride, but since there is essentially no safe way to cross I-89 as a pedestrian to get to the park and ride, for the people who live out there, might as well be on the moon. And so I'm glad that in this study you addressed the economic inequity of the status quo.
Thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate that. It's vital. And to the extent that this project could be phased, what we've heard from people, and it only makes sense, is that a first phase would be to make that connection between Riverview Commons and the park and ride. And while there are still some technical aspects of it which could be challenging, even getting under the interstate itself, you have a great example at exit 12 up there in Williston, where they simply built, and we have some sort of mock-ups of what that could look like built into the slope below the interstate to be able to connect their new park and ride to most of the shopping and businesses on the other side of the interstate. And frankly, it's also an opportunity, given how important it is, there is federal funding available for these types of projects to try to address the fact that, yeah, it's might as well be on the moon. And when the interstate came through, separating that neighborhood from much of town. Well, step forward then and show some of these ideas that we're already talking about were part of our design development process. Scoping study does have a purpose and need, and part of it is to address the historically underserved community of Riverview Commons. The purpose and need statement kind of sets the framework, but generally speaking, the purpose is to support active transportation connection between the Village Center, Park and Ride, and Riverview Commons. The need addresses safety, the lack of road connections, and in this last paragraph, we go into the critical need to address these iniquities, historic iniquities for disadvantaged communities by improving the transportation connections to the park and ride, and potentially, certainly the village, potentially, certainly the schools. As we thought about design, we're building on information about what is ideal, what we can consider, various principles of how shared use paths have been created in the past. And at different places along this route, we might be able to employ different of these designs as necessary based on conditions. There's also a fair bit of guidance. You know, we talked about vertical slope of the paths, and not only is it the overall grade, but it's about abrupt changes in grade. We have to consider clearance above head, and we also have to talk about materials. And perhaps that's another phasing opportunity. While it's easier to maintain concrete or asphalt potentially than gravel, particularly if water is coming down the hill, there are significant cost differentials. We did explore and reach out to, as you see, Mr. Seltzer on the lower left, Assistant Attorney General, Transportation Legal Unit, about the interface between the rail and Route 2. Richmond also undertook what we were calling the pinch point study very recently, and that area right along the cemetery was one of the pinch points. And should it be possible to actually extend the road on the south side, that might then free up more space on the north side along the cemetery. That's a work in progress, but it was great to see the stars align, if you will, for that concern. And this all went into our design development. Here you see the examples. The upper two photographs are from Williston under exit 12. The lower right photograph is the existing condition at exit 11 here in Richmond under the interstate, and the simulation based on Williston of what it could look like there on the lower left. How with a relatively short retaining wall, they didn't need much of one in Williston, you could provide 6-8 foot path depending on really just how high that retaining wall would be, along with proper engineering and analysis of that slope and the support for the interstate, of course. Another aspect of this is we were looking at, there's one of the routes we were looking at going along Route 2 all the way through the intersection with Governor Peck toward the Lucky Spot Variety would come to the on-ramp to I-89 South. And obviously cars whip around that. And so a solution that's been explored on Interstate 91 down at White River Junction is actually what you see here. They got rid of the on-ramp, and all vehicles have to make a 90-degree turn, which slows them down significantly and adds opportunity for a much safer crossing. The above is a Photoshop simulation using the aerial because they hadn't yet caught up with the new version, but you see on the lower That is the existing condition recently at exit 11 on Interstate 91 down at White River Junction, where they simply got rid of that very fast slip ramp. And you see the truck having to make that much, much slower 90-degree turn. The design concepts then, based on all of that information and our field work and what we heard from people, the no-build design concept does not mean that road improvements wouldn't continue to be done. Doesn't mean that the many items that were noted in that pinch point study couldn't be properly addressed. It simply means as a transportation project that we're considering the scoping study as a multi-use transportation path, that in and of itself wouldn't move forward. So that remains on the table. The two main routes that we designed are very similar coming out of Richmond Village and heading westward. They really just diverge, you'll see, past as we get toward the mobile station, in fact. And that's a picture of the flexible delineators that you were talking about. It would include under the interchange, they both would something similar to Williston. And to the extent that there are wetlands right along, you see the Phragmites as you drive by. Those would have to be managed through the Department of Environmental Conservation's rules for doing that. And we have information about that in the scoping study. And so you'd be working not only with VTrans, not only with the Regional Planning Commission, but also with TINA or someone like that with the DEC, the Regional Wetlands Ecologist. The second route, and this is the one that got more support throughout the community and during the process as it emerged, is you can see right to the east of the mobile station, the idea would be to actually go overland a lot more and have a much greater separation distance from the Route 2 corridor by going, and yes, these are some wetlands right through here behind the mobile station. And the innovation that this design concept has is the use of underpasses. And the first of which would be, and we reached out to VTrans and they in theory supported the idea. They didn't immediately say no, obviously it would require design development. The first such underpass there in the magenta would go under the on-ramp to southbound 89 and emerge in the rear of the park and ride. And the second of them, and then it would go this route would go behind the park and ride, and then under the interstate in the same way as we showed before, just like 12 in Williston or something similar. And then instead of continuing toward the lucky spot and entering Riverview Commons that way from 117, this would have another underpass onto these on and off ramps from northbound to Cleary Stone or along the edge of their property, obviously working with Cleary Stone to that back entrance on Governor Peck to Riverview Commons. Those were the two main design concepts that emerged out of all the research of prior studies, understanding the floodplains, understanding the rail corridor impact, and how that made it sounds like the rail corridor when it comes to opportunities for VTrans to move Route 2 is a very serious limiting factor legally and feasibly. And so that's why we're staying on the north side of Route 2. And given that, the two options were to basically hug Route 2 as much as possible all the way on to River Road to the lucky spot, or at some point here east of the mobile, start doing as much as possible overland as facilitated by more boardwalks and these underpasses. In the middle of the interchange, you have any number of options for what a lot of people loved as one of the great assets of this trail is that you could design anything from social spaces to natural features interpretation. There is wetland here, almost certainly a legacy of the construction of the interchange, but that doesn't mean that they're not functioning or have value as wetlands for habitat, for groundwater recharge, and eventually for sequestering carbon like any wetland would. However, how this is traversed, one or more of these ways were part of our exploration in the scoping study. And then finally, putting those together in terms of the design concepts, we prepared this matrix based on all of these factors that you see along the top, from user safety, value as transport, comfort, some of the yard and environmental impacts, conceptual level costs, construction difficulty. Our survey scores also benefit as a recreation path, and put all of those together on a 0 through 3 scale, depending on its positivity or negativity to the overall process, and came out with a total score where that somewhat overland underpass boardwalk route we were calling the Gateway Trail received the slightly highest score. This is a tool. This doesn't mean that as a select board you need to endorse this or any of the routes. This doesn't mean that the Gateway Trail wins, but at least as a way to try to put numbers on the quantitative and qualitative aspects of this project, integrate the public feedback through the surveys. That's what this matrix is intended to do. And so it wasn't a blowout, but the Gateway Trail did receive a higher score than that North Side Straight, which continues all the way straight to Lucky Spot, or compared to the no build, which again, it does not add some of the benefits, but obviously has far less cost and fewer impacts to not do anything. Any questions on the design concepts, the particulars of them, how we created that matrix before I move forward into, okay, now what phase of the report?
Dan,
Yeah, we do have some questions. I just want to quickly interject. I want to talk about this in depth, but we're already over time. But I do have a question, Bard.
My question was lighting. When I started to look at some of the paths here and where they would go, that they would arguably be kind of dark, and then either there might be safety issues because of the isolation and lack of lighting, and there might also then be intrusion and cost if we add lighting. Does that make sense?
100%. Yes.
And then just any comments on lighting, and I realize that we're still pretty conceptual here.
Well, I'd appreciate yours. You mentioned the trade-offs very well. It's possible to do relatively low bollard lighting that is aimed in such a way to illuminate the path. If it has to be done right, though, because we're also, when there's safety, which is collision avoidance and impact reduction. And then there's security, which is that personal feeling of the potential for harm or the ability for someone to do someone along this path harm. And both of those you're trying to address when you're looking at lighting. And so it doesn't mean that you have to have bright lighting, but what it usually means is you need to have relatively uniform lighting, aimed in the right place, of a color temperature if it's an LED that doesn't induce glare, so relatively low color temperature, and shielded also in such a way as to minimize trespass either backwards toward properties or onto the roadway in such a way that it creates glare. And so there are ways you can do that through bollard lighting in many locations, but then you usually need more lights. The shorter the light, the more you need, and you don't want that light to be going up into the eyes of the users. You could do that with spaced area lighting if it's aimed and shield and does all those things that I said in terms of not creating hot spots and shadows. Certainly around these underpasses, and in here when we talk in greater detail about the underpasses, even during the day, having illumination inside those underpasses, both for safety and security, would be essential. So beyond the underpass lighting, we didn't include any other pathway lighting in our cost estimate, but if you think that is something that we should either assume or put into a conservative cost estimate, we absolutely will. Probably, let's say we're putting in a 12 to 15 foot high, which is kind of a human scaled light along this. They'd probably want to be spaced about 100 to 150 feet apart with a distribution pattern that's relatively horizontal. You could have a fairly uniform, continuous kind of lighting along the path. And so we would then calculate the cost of each of those lights along the entire route. And that's absolutely something we could do.
Thank you. We have a couple questions from the audience. Kara?
We've been asked to come early into projects to make comments and express concerns. I'm very concerned about the trail one that you have presented as the best percentage one. Here are my concerns. I think you're going through the largest portion of the floodplain by changing and going that route. You're definitely, unless you're going up the bank higher, but it sounds like you're going through wetlands, so that would be for a lower terrain. And then the floodplain, and then the tunnels that you're doing underneath the interstate, specifically over at the Cleary area.
Yeah.
You're creating a tunnel in the floodplain, which then becomes a water chute. And if people aren't aware of a surge or anything like that, and there's a stream right there by Cleary, and if that gets full, I am very concerned about those tunnels that become channels. Thank you, David. I appreciate that. Channels rather than a safe pedestrian or bicycle area. So I'm very concerned about the one that appears to be the best percentage, but based on my view of the floodplain and my view of the wetlands, it is the most impactful of those areas. Thank you.
We would definitely, if we use that approach, definitely need to have really good, I mean, you'd have to have drains in the floor of the chute. And even then, the water could be just way too much.
No, that whole chute, that floodplain area, I took all the pictures during tropical storm. I mean, that whole area, that chute will be full of water.
Oh, it'll be, okay, completely under.
It'll be completely underwater.
Okay.
That just, you know that
Right.
it
That was
actually,
my comment about the drains, but if it's completely submerged, then it's no use at all, right?
correct, it's gonna be completely submerged. And then that first one over near the first intersection area, my question was, we can't tell by the elevation, is that in or out of the floodplain? Because the complete parking ride got flooded, as well as up the banks on the mobile.
Quick question, so I just want to understand correctly, there are two tunnels going underneath the on-ramps of the interstate. Is that what we're talking about?
On that route, one
On
would
that
be under the southbound on-ramp,
Okay.
and the other one would be under the northbound on-ramp, near Clary Stone.
Okay, and then my second question is, you're talking about the footage of what they're discussing of the bike path. What is that? And I understand there's like pinch areas that we talked about for the cemetery, but again, I'm looking at it for even our property, like what are you looking at? Footage.
Dan, you said it was a 10-foot wide trail?
That's an ideal minimum, 8 to 10 feet based on for our calculations purpose, we did 10 feet. If there are places where it needs to go narrower, due to any number of reasons, including property owner input relative to the right of way, it could do that. The idea is you want to at least be able to have cyclists pass each other, wheelchair users pass each other. And that at an absolute technical minimum from both of those standpoints is 6 feet. The minimum width of an accessible wheelchair path is 3 feet. And a reasonable width given handlebars and a bit of a safety buffer for cyclists is also 3 feet. And yeah, so ideally it's more, and that's what we based our calculations on. But until those final designs are done and discussions happen in any locations that might be outside of the right of way, for a boardwalk, the Department of Environmental Conservation has specific criteria on widths relative to permit. And at many of the boardwalks, that is typically, so to not have a permit or not to require additional mitigation of the boardwalk structure, that's 5 feet. And so if we were to try to go to 6 feet with a boardwalk, there might have to be different designs integrated into the boardwalk to permit that minimum passing width.
Okay.
And they have additional provisions in terms of the planks, clearance, how the footings are prepared. And any time that the DEC might permit a boardwalk within wetlands, the value of the project, the purpose of the project needs to be consistent with, larger, it needs to be justified. Otherwise, they won't support the project. And even if it is justified, there are some of these very specific design criteria for boardwalks.
Thanks, Dan. Heidi has a follow-up, then we have two more
Okay,
questions.
so my question to you, Dan, is because I was looking at our property on this, so I'm looking at on our specific property, 3 trees being cut down, the telephone pole being moved, and boulders being moved. So because of the height and then a wall,
Some kind of retaining wall. to
retaining wall.
Adjust the slope.
So the question would be, is like, how high is this wall? And to get the slope, you understand where I'm talking, everyone, the slope coming down into Route 2, and I'm trying to visualize this, and then trying to visualize how wide is this gonna be?
And
Is
how's the
that on one of the
And
photographs,
how
the
does our
labeled
driveway
photograph?
fit? Thank
So
you,
Dan,
yes,
this would be the property if you're heading on Route
it's
2
right on your
west,
picture.
just past the
Right.
where the sidewalk stops. This is the next property.
Keep coming back. Right, oh,
Sort of at the bottom of the hill after the sidewalk stops, if you're heading west on the north
keep
side.
going, one more, keep going down.
Further back.
So
Okay.
not 8.
Yeah, back up.
Lower numbers.
Lower numbers,
11, 12.
lower numbers,
Oh, the other one.
Essentially here.
nope, keep going,
4 or 6, somewhere in there.
keep
Did
going.
we somehow not
Make it
capture.
6. Right there. So
Here,
it's gonna
okay.
be 6. So
Thank you.
6, 5 and 6. 5 and 6 is perfect.
Yeah, okay,
So-
good. Thank you.
So there, our quad is right there. So I'm seeing the bike path.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
through this here. Oh, you can't see, I'm sorry. Sorry, Dan. So I'm seeing that there and the yellow. And so it says moving the utility pole, removing 3 trees, filling the slope with outer retaining wall and installing a rail at the top of the wall. So I'm questioning,
The
There's-
infrastructure behind placing the
Yeah.
the trail where the yellow band is on slide 5 and 6.
yes,
It could be
It's
closer to the
substantial.
road. These are suggestions, should an engineer then want to move forward, these are the kinds of things that they'll be faced with, quite frankly. And so should this swath move one way or the other? I would say if we're removing trees within, in this case, the right of way, that they should be replanted. Utility poles can be moved, and they are frequently for this kind of the project. The reason for the railing at the top of the wall is because the wall would be on the outside. We wouldn't want then anyone falling over the wall. I'll have to double check that. I'll have to
I
install
just
the
don't want a
railing.
liability.
Yes.
Right, exactly. You can't have a liability. Once a retaining wall is above of
I
a certain
think
couple of
there's
feet, it
natural
makes
conflict.
perfect sense to have a wall. But the larger point is that these are impacts to your property. And I guess larger point is that there are technical hurdles we have to overcome. But what are your thoughts?
Well, my first observation, Dan, as somebody who drives by this a gazillion times, if you flatten out the slope, essentially extend the slope to reduce the grade, you now have a path that is above the current elevation of Route 2 or the driveway.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that works. It creates a barrier between Route 2 and the driveway to that building.
Okay, I think that some of what you're thinking might be the sort of the graphic convention of these swooshes. They're not intended
actually,
to look like they're higher
it's
than.
not. So it's really not. It's
Okay,
my
sorry.
my
Apologies.
memory of the slope from the end of the current sidewalk down. That hill is short and steep, and you have to then extend the slope of the hill out further to reach the appropriate grade. But as soon as you do that, you've elevated the slope of the path above both Route 2 and the driveway.
Or you gotta cut the slope before it, just to let you know. Cut, well, no, you did.
Okay, Gary?
Thanks.
Yeah, I've just a couple comments. I really support this off alignment as much as possible, particularly through the interstate portion. I think it's the only safe route for kids to get on a bike and ride in town. Having them cross Governor Peck, and then the intersection with 117, and then cross 3 interstate access points. And then the mobile station is just, it's just way too dangerous.
Yeah.
The one thing talking with Chris Cole at one of our earlier meeting, he said, because all of that phase of the project is on state controlled land, they feasibly could just pick up the tab for the whole thing and make it one of their projects.
Okay.
So even though it's the most expensive part of this whole project, it might not cost the town anything.
Can I quote you on that, Gary?
Yes,
Gary
you may.
said.
Yeah.
Denise?
Denise Barnard. Dan, I just have a quick question. How would people get from like the stoplight in Richmond to, what's your address?
282 West Main Street.
282 West Main.
This is the intersection of Route 2 and Bridge Street, Jericho Road, the four-way stop, the four-way intersection in the middle of Richmond.
Right. Our project area extended basically from the western end of the existing sidewalk westward. And so we didn't further explore whether that existing sidewalk was sufficient as an active transportation route. We didn't explore whether the bike lanes along, and we can pop into Google Earth if you had the time, happy to, would also fulfill that function. So our scoped project area pretty much started where the existing sidewalk west of that intersection ended up. But if you have suggestions you'd like us to include for improvements between Bridge Street and the start of our project, we'll definitely add them to the report.
So clarification, where would it start? I'm confused. Would it
Mhm.
start at Heidi's property?
You'd start on the sidewalk on the north side of West Main Street. Take the sidewalk.
So
Doherty's house.
Yeah,
okay, so
but it
does
stops at the Doherty
but
property
does the
now.
sidewalk go out that far?
It stops at the Doherty house.
It stops at the Doherty's.
And then
Okay,
there's a
so
steep-
everybody would use the sidewalk that
Right.
is current. Okay,
There's a steep slope where the sidewalk
Right,
stops
right,
and
right.
literally, then it goes through the Borman
Gotcha.
property.
It does start in one of the more technically challenging spots.
There are a lot of challenging spots there.
But the bicyclers stay on Route 2. They don't go on the sidewalk. So we're only talking pedestrians. And there's an intersection there that it becomes both.
Ostensibly, but Gary's point is with, at what age is it appropriate to be riding a bike on
Well, I don't disagree.
here?
Just that's the way the design is right now.
Yeah.
Is the sidewalk ends and becomes a path that merges with the existing Route 2, bicyclers coming onto the path.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for walking us through this. I'd like to spend more time on it, but we're already 40 minutes overtime. I do
We
just
are.
want to say my 2 cents. I do like the route going overland under the southbound on-ramp and then the northbound on-ramp. That has always been the preferred route in my mind, but I always assumed messing with the interstate ramps was a no-no. It's encouraging to know that it's at least plausible.
So maybe we
It is
could
very
close-
encouraging.
we have to
sorry?
move on, is contemplate maybe a priority would be connecting Riverview, which is that section, as people have observed, under the control of the Agency of Transportation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
How do we connect Riverview to the park and ride as a stage?
Yeah.
That would be my phase one of the
Right.
project.
And we do talk about that in the phasing component. We also have more detail on these underpasses and boardwalks and what have you. But in terms of project phasing, that would be our recommendation as well. Focus on that for all the positive reasons you talked about. Here's some other funding opportunities you can look into. I'm grateful for the time. In terms of an ask, you don't have to select a preferred alternative among the three of these, the no build, that North Side Straight, or what we're calling the Gateway Trail. But if you are willing to this evening, we would put that in the document for you as the selected by the select board, the preferred alternative.
David, if that's the preferred alternative, because you had pointed to me, the preferred alternative, on that one place where it comes out at Cleary, can you bring it further up the embankment and come out higher? And if you're gonna do any kind of boardwalk out that way versus dropping it down, because you're gonna have that stream to contend with right there to get over to Governor
I was
Peck.
just looking at the
Can you lift it up?
flood maps, and it actually, that on-ramp, well, I guess off-ramp, on-ramp gains elevation pretty quickly as you go
Yeah.
up, more than I,
So you
Yeah.
could.
yeah, so there is room to
So that you're not putting that
hopefully stay planning.
low.
There's a lot of elevation there. Yeah.
Mhm. And maybe you're talking about the blue route here, which perhaps goes up through the Green Mountain Power property and then down Governor Peck to the entrance of Riverview Commons. And if that's a solution from a floodway standpoint or a technical feasibility standpoint, we put that in there as an option. But there is elevation, but floods are getting more frequent and it's hard to predict what might happen. If you were to select a preferred alternative, that wouldn't also obligate Richmond at all to move forward one way or the other. It'd simply be an opportunity to document, a vote by the select board for one of these three design concepts. If you think that we should simply focus on this one and change to perhaps a blue route in those original drawings, we could change it to this. If you think that's more likely to be above the flood line or the floodplain, we can definitely do that. It sounds like that's a critical item and we can revise our drawings accordingly.
I think it's certainly worth taking a look at. I don't know if we need to make a steadfast decision tonight.
I would prefer not to.
Well, thank you, Dan. That's pretty in-depth. I want to keep going.
Fair enough. Grateful for your time. Thank you all.
At what point do we hand this off to town committee?
You're gonna go all the way up to Hill and Riverview and then back down again.
I'll leave that, I mean, this came from a town committee. This came
Yeah.
from Transportation Committee scoping study.
Right.
So now I think it's up to, I guess, Keith, what do you think for next actions, if any at this point? It would be direction from the select board to move forward with another study or?
Yeah, I would have the select board get their arms wrapped around this whole study. I mean, that would be the first step, to be honest with you. I mean, there are multiple endpoints on that study as displayed by Dan. It's pretty exciting, but I'll tell you, it's pretty expensive, to say the least. But at this point, with an inactive transportation committee, they've given you the recommendation that you want or they want, and it's really in your lap right now as a board. A workshop would not be the end of the world either.
What's the total price? Dan had listed three things: technical feasibility, public support, and cost, and we didn't get to the cost yet.
Yeah.
What's the cost? Dan?
Can pull it up.
The estimate for this overland route, given the more extensive boardwalk and the underpasses, is about $11 million. The North Side Straight, which continued along Route 2, also went under the underpass, but didn't have quite the extent of boardwalk or certainly the underpasses. That estimate at a planning level is about $4+ million.
So my recommendation is that we ask the Agency of Transportation to solve the problem that they created when they, in roughly 1963, separated Riverview Commons that had just been built in 1960. And connect the largest section arguably of moderate income affordable housing such as it is in our town to the park and ride. I think that is a social good. I think it's an economic good. And it's my position that the Agency of Transportation, having unwittingly perhaps created the problem, should be in a position of now solving the problem. That's my perspective.
Well, this was also addressed in the revamp of the park and ride. We said we wanted to see that link go in and they said, oh, and nothing was done.
So that would be my recommendation. And I like the pink route because it's the straightest for a couple of reasons, but we could contemplate that. I would defer to the Agency of Transportation about how would they prefer to solve the problem.
Thank you. And you just see these last two are very large dollar with local matches. And so it's not nothing. But this last active transportation planning and construction, this Reconnecting Communities grant from $2 million for planning up to $100 million for construction is specifically intended to do the kind of reconnection that you're talking about. That's federal funding, but it would be administered through the Regional Planning Commission.
Is there a matching grant? Like what percentage matching?
Right, so 50% construction, 80% planning well, I think those numbers are actually reversed. That should be 20% match for planning, 50% for construction. The one above it, Safe Streets and Roads for All, up to $30 million, is an 80% funded project. And so none of these are, except the smaller demonstration level projects such as Local Motion might do, for the flexible delineators. None of these have no local match. So it's still a significant decision for Richmond in terms of an investment in this kind of project.
Which is why I think we need to have a conversation with the agency in transportation who, again, I don't want to throw them under the bus, so to speak. But I think they literally created the problem that we're facing in that section of this.
Well, thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Thanks again. Take care.
July 1st.
I guess you could. I don't know what more we'll have by July 1st.
Well, we can ponder it, season it. Is that the phrase?
Yeah, we'll let it season until then, come back to it and say, what's our proposed next step?
Thanks again, Dan.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you.
So are we ready to move on to C, discussion of the process for the 2 transportation planning studies, Thompson Road, Huntington Road, Bridge Street, Cochran Road intersection, and the Cochran Road scoping study?
Sure. I think maybe turn it to Keith to explain a little bit more detail on this.
Yeah, I think, as we all know, you don't have an active transportation committee and you are now the de facto advisory committee for the town. If there is a member of the select board that wishes to join the transportation committee, please come on board and then we can be active again. That's something that I feel would be a positive for the committee to have a select board member. But with that said, what are we talking about? We're talking about Thompson THBC at this point. You want to start with that one?
Sure.
Okay, so we'll need to have a committee formed for that, or you need to resuscitate the RTC. My office can handle this through an ad hoc committee if need be. I would again prefer to have a select board member on that committee. I would like to have Pete on that committee also, and potentially Josh and myself, if at all possible. Obviously, we want public input on what we want to have happen at that intersection. I know we want to do a soft footprint as opposed to what was presented and what was preferred by the transportation committee. So I'm here to get guidance from you. What do you folks feel like you want to do? What is the appetite that you have? Do you want to put this on hold for a few months? I really don't have much guidance from you at this point.
If I may, right now, my bandwidth to join another committee is fairly limited, and we worked out last summer that me taking on everything doesn't typically work out well. David, Bard, and I are already on the Water and Sewer Commission, which can be a pretty involved job. So I'm kind of looking to the left end of the table as far as whether one of you two would be interested in being on the Transportation Committee. No pressure, I'm just.
And just to clarify too, so there's sort of 2 asks. I think one could be sort of a limited short time scope to work with Keith and potentially myself and Pete on some options for the THBC intersection. And that could potentially be just a couple meetings to say, yep, this looks good. Let's go back to the select board. It's still time, but it's not an ask to join the full transportation committee.
Okay.
Right.
So,
Now, I would add that that's a focused committee. I mean, that's a focused ask. It's not like you're joining the transportation committee and you're going to pick up all the projects that we have active. It's just focused on THBC.
Josh, question. I spent a long time talking to the transport committee, at least 1 or 2 members.
You're hired.
And I'm not done. And there's a long-standing list of impediments we've given them. That would have to change. And if it does, I'll do it. So,
Okay.
and one of the impediments is we have taken action as a board that has completely either negated their efforts or abandoned their efforts or trampled them, or not a good term, whatever the word is. And that needs to not happen. If I'm going to be on that committee, I'm going to start throwing things up the wall, because that's not the right way to treat a friendly group.
Yeah.
And a group with expertise. So if we back off a little bit, let them do their work, take the recommendations, and if we change something like we have here, don't change it and, put the gavel down and give it back to them to consider the changes before it's gavelled.
Bart?
I'll only observe that it's an awkward reality that people will not always show up at our various committee meetings, but will show up to the select board to get another bite at the apple, if you will. That's just how it works. So it is difficult because the committees are advisory or recommending things to us, and this is, I'm tempted to say, where the rubber hits the road. That this is where we have to make the decisions, and I think it's why sometimes people come out of the woodwork to show up here to say, no, I don't like that, and that has happened more than once in my time on this select
Like
board.
this summer so
Exactly,
far.
yeah, we're a lightning rod in a sense, but we need to remand it to the committee when we learn new information instead of just marching off with those results.
And so that's, you know, that may be how we manage it, like how we say, well, send it back. The sidewalk is an example, you know, so there was some feedback and it coalesced. So sometimes the timing is just what it is. It's sort of organic or social, and you can't, it's not engineered, perhaps. We can't predict it adequately in advance. Several of us have probably been surprised at what the voters have voted for and against over the last 20 years, right? Like that just happens. So I think it's tough for us where we're trying to make judgments about what's right, but also listening to citizens, and it's not just what they say, but how many of them say it, and they may come with new perspectives that were not entirely considered. And there are times where there are sort of odd bedfellows. People are against something for a variety of reasons, but enough variety of reasons and enough people against it that they don't want it to happen. And so that ends up coming up here. All that said, I'd be willing to go to a couple of meetings on the specific topic, sort of time limited, to look at, as I recall, the mandate was for Keith, et cetera, to look at, okay, what are the range of options from sort of like we just saw, from the least expensive intrusive to the most expensive, you know, from stop blocks, signage, and all the way out. And so from that range of options, what do we want to do in the near term that's actionable and palatable, I guess?
So we've
anyway.
got Bart and Lisa to have a couple meetings, review some options, and then come back to the select board with THPC. Is that, I mean,
Yeah, that's what I might-
limited scope, limited frame, at
That,
least at this point?
projects, I guess. I don't bring any expertise to the table. That's the problem. And maybe that's good.
Well, I
Maybe
think what
just
we're
listen.
looking for is really sort of, you know, if we come up with, or Keith comes up with an idea that, you know, both of you look at it and say, well, that's just not gonna work, you know, we'd rather get that feedback early before we come to the select board, and at least this way it gives us a little bit of vetting on it before we come to the board with some ideas. So if both of you are willing for a couple meetings, I think that would be helpful. Keith, is that get where we need to be for THPC?
Yeah, that or an ad hoc committee, one or the other. You know, we just got to get something functioning. That's really my focus at this point, because nothing is functioning.
Gary?
I just asked that, this isn't my idea, but somebody suggested it to me, and I think it's the best one I've heard, is that when you look at your list of options, I don't think it's that dangerous for cars. I do walk through there a lot. I think it's dangerous because people don't stop for pedestrians. So I think maybe just another lighted push button light for pedestrians.
And much better markings on the pavement, much better markings on the pavement.
I just wanted to go back to what Barb was talking about. Amy Gifford, sorry. One of the ways to smooth over the process between the transportation committee and the select board is for there to be a greater level of outreach. And the sidewalk is an example. The fact that I own a business where the sidewalk was going to be impacted, we've already been through this. I was not notified. So that's a basic level of outreach that didn't happen. And so that would help a lot. That would go a long way towards making the ideas that get here be more vetted by the community before you're making a decision that potentially throws the idea out. So just.
If I may, one thing, we're drowning in information. And if you go out of town for 3 days and come back and look at your email and go, you know, I'm gonna just have to mark those front porch forum emails red. Well, what if in that one, I agree with you. What if the notification that we're looking for people for a particular topic was in that? You know, and what has worked for organizations I've been part of in the past is to have a dedicated mailing list that anybody can sign up on that would be used for literally only that purpose. So that anybody in town who wants to get an email every time anything transportation related is being discussed, they sign up for that and they know it will not be a social list, it won't be a chatting list, it'll be literally an email distribution list to say FYI. And that way people know it's not going to be a big impact, but they're going to be able to stay in the loop. Because as I look here, every single person here at some point has said, I didn't hear about that until it was almost too late. And a simple email would have made all the difference in the
That's
world.
a good idea.
Yeah, we could probably, I think we already have one of those accounts, and we could add some mailing lists and integrate it, so that could work out. Do we want to talk about Cochran Road study? Oh, sorry.
To your point about what you should do and how you should go forward with committee versus that, I think Keith's suggestion of an ad hoc to start with, that makes it very temporary. You can have it very temporary, and then you can tackle one thing at a time to start with, to see if it's productive to have 2 select board members. And that key piece of communicating with the public, you know, I come to everything, and if I haven't heard of something, then it's not clear in how you're advertising it, how you're talking about it. And especially for property owners, you got 2 property owners in the room with 2 different projects that didn't know anything about it.
Right, and I don't think that's acceptable, and just because we can say, well, you can look on the town website. If you've ever read the book Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
23.
Yeah, the very beginning of the book is the guy finds out that they're gonna knock his house down and build a freeway through. And he says, where was this notified? And they said, well, it was on file at the town council. Yes, it was in a filing cabinet in a disused laboratory in the basement, locked with a sign on the door that said, beware of the leopard. And that's sometimes what we're up against, because we take for granted, we come to these meetings, we know everything that's going on. We take for granted that if people really want to know, they'll go look, and we've had our knuckles burned by that. So I think we should still keep posting it everywhere we do, but I think a distribution email list, that you know would only, if you get an email from that list, you should read it, you know?
Can you just be clear in what the true projects are that you were talking about on your select board agenda? And as well as your committee agendas? If we are talking about a recreational path that's connecting from the village all the way through, you know, Route 2 direction to Riverview Commons, a clear description of that on your agenda might have brought more people to your meeting. Any one of your topics like that, a clear agenda item will bring people to your meeting that are impacted.
You had a question about the Cochran Road?
Oh, you're gonna-
Oh, go ahead, Kathleen.
Thank you. I just had one comment about the Thompson Road, Bridge Street, Cochran, Huntington intersection. Living on Thompson Road, and I know that at the last select board meeting, there was discussion about the crosswalks painting, and they look great. The signs are really not helping at all, and it's really dangerous. So I know in the short term, you had talked about making sure you had signs, and they like maybe have a 10-foot view because a tree branch covers the one from Huntington Road, the travel from Huntington Road. So cars may not even see it. And for some reason, the one on Bridge Street is, I don't know, it's cockeyed, and it has, both of them actually have fluorescent paint that someone has painted on them, so you really don't easily see the signs. So I just mention this now because it's an immediate issue. If nothing else, those signs are not, they're just not safe. They're leading to a not safe situation.
Thank you.
So the next one is there's a Cochran Road scoping study that Keith has an update on, and sort of some next steps to discuss.
You ready, Keith?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Kara says is I agree. My preferred method would be to have an ad hoc committee. I don't have to wait for a date certain. We could set that date. And I think that's important. I hope I'm coming through. I'm on a hot spot here. However you want to move forward, my main focus is to get things functioning again. That's really all I'm about right now.
Keith, did you want to speak to the Cochran Road scoping study?
Am I coming across okay? Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay. Cochran Road, well, you got the update from CCRCP. The next steps are to do a presentation at some point, and without the RTC functioning, that makes the select board the advisory committee at this point. It's a pretty light lift. We're probably 6 to 8 weeks away from anything happening on this. My office can handle that aspect of it. You do have the two ends with the speed tables already installed. They're aware of that. And they're going to be incorporating that into the study also. And that is the focus. I highly suggest, even though that document landed late last week, let's take a look at it and see what the next steps are, and we go from there. But right now, that's not imminent. That's something we could probably do in late July or early August as an update to you folks.
Any questions for Keith? We've got 12 minutes back. Thank you, Keith.
Yep.
So moving back up to A, reminder, June 24th, week from tonight, the special meeting of the select board to discuss issues and solutions regarding pedestrians and traffic in the village. Josh, anything you wanted to add to that?
I guess just a question for the board on agenda items. I started to kind of draft a couple of ideas. One, I think it might be helpful to share again the Bridge Street bike and pedestrian scoping study, so that we do have sort of a basis to start from, because some of these questions in public outreach has happened throughout the transportation committee to get to that document. And then I was envisioning perhaps a session where we list out items that people want to talk about, issues, and then the next agenda item would be kind of going step by step and brainstorming some possible ideas. I could kind of be note taker for the issues and solutions. Unless someone had a more structured plan process or in mind, that's sort of what I was thinking. So happy to hear feedback and suggestions.
Josh, I think that'd be a lot better, because right now, what I've observed generally is something's presented, immediately there are questions. There's not time to really research the questions, or particularly the answers. So we do that next time, but we don't set it up that way. So if we take input, take it back, digest it, produce output, which will generate input the next time. You know, it looks slower, but it's a lot cleaner, and I think we'll get better answers out of it.
And this will be the focus of the meeting. We won't have to, bury something to move on to the next agenda.
That would help. Yeah, we can't tell how long this is going to take.
Yeah. So focus working group.
Yeah, and if you like those 3 agenda items, then we can go with that and hopefully have a good meeting with some information. And yeah, I mean, won't get us immediate answers, but it'll get us some guidance and some good public feedback.
Karen?
This is to discuss issues and solutions for pedestrians and traffic in the village, but are you going strictly the village? I mean, are you going out to all of Bridge Street to go to that Thompson Road intersection? Because we've talked about solutions of painting the word stop and a line for both those 2 stop signs there, because people do rolling stops, and some kind of signage that says bicycles stop too. Because it's the bicyclers that in more than one occasion we've talked about that just blow through the stop signs and are pulling out in front of traffic. So some kind of signage for those folks as well. You've talked and heard solutions on multiple occasions. Are we going to have to go to those meetings and repeat suggestions, or have you guys been tracking anywhere some basic solutions that can be implemented immediately, like before the 4th of July, and easily and not cost a lot? Or are we going to hash those little pieces out all over again? I just want to know what perspective it's come to.
Specifically to that intersection, that's kind of what we just talked about, handing off to the ad hoc committee, right?
So the genesis of this was the Bridge Street corridor, and then we had pushback. People wanted to expand it, so we opened it to the village.
Okay, so that's just, I'm trying to, I think you need to define from what section to what section, so that people aren't coming with the wrong discussion points. Like Lisa wants to say, let's bring the information together and digest it. We need to know which piece you want us to bring.
So for item A, what's the scope?
Yeah. What we have heard is there's a problem with pedestrian traffic up in the business district, the Mason block. Also, the pedestrian safety by the market on both sides of the street crossing. Pedestrian safety here in front of the town center and pedestrian safety accessing the park. So that's what we're hearing, in addition to the Thompson Road, Cochran Road, Heinsberg Road.
So do we want to define it for purposes of that meeting as Route 2 to the bridge?
I guess, because we had initially decided to do Bridge Street. And then, I don't know if you remember at the last meeting, there was pushback. Well, what about? So we backed it up.
Bridge Street, I mean, Route 2 to the bridge sounds,
Plausible?
yeah.
It's very descriptive.
Seems
Thank you.
in line with the original.
So we're
But
looking,
having said that, I don't disagree with that, but next week, somebody's gonna say, well, how come I can't walk from the school to Southview? How come I can't? So we need to, if we decide that, and I'm not saying we should, right, we need to,
I will just say, for the record, my neighbors on Tilden Avenue have some requests as well, so the scope is.
We're not putting in a monorail.
so do we want to, on the agenda, do we want to say Route 2 to the bridge? Like,
I think
is
so,
that-
for the purposes, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but that is, I think it's the main corridor, so to speak. And there actually are pedestrians there, unlike there are some on Route 2, but not so many.
more than there used to be.
Do you think people will get confused and talk about the new bridge?
Stoplight to
My
bridge.
question is, I know some people had mentioned about the lighting out here.
Mhm.
Is that gonna be a part of the discussion then?
I think so, because
Okay.
that was brought up,
Because that was a safety thing.
Yeah, the light here is terrible.
Okay.
Yeah.
That-
And include
we
the
just wanna
town
make sure that
center
the-
area,
the town
the
center
town
campus.
center campus, if you will.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
And I think
Should
to
we
be
say-
explicit about that,
should we say Route 2 to the bridge? So Bridge Street and
Route
side
2
streets
when you
from
say-
Route 2 to the bridge and town-owned property and parking lots.
Yeah.
So that
in
could-
that area.
In that area, yes, sorry, yeah.
That would take in the Depot Street parking lot.
It could be Depot Street, it could be the parking lot up by Big Spruce, it could be this one, it could be Volunteers Green. But
And a
then
dog
you,
park.
there's a dog park. So yeah, okay, so within that scope, I can define
Or
that.
Gary, then Denise. Oh,
Kathleen has her hand back up.
Kathleen, go ahead.
Great, thank you. I know you have a number of reports already available to you that you might be using for next week, but there's one I did want to just add to the chat, and that is the walkability report, which includes 3 areas, one of which you're talking about the focus of next week's meeting. That is the Bridge Street, actually goes out East and West Main and then to the bridge. And then there are 2 other areas that they don't sound like they're part of next week's meeting. That was a study done 2 years ago with 18 volunteers and the Transportation Committee, and there may be good food for thoughts. There have been some suggestions that have already been implemented, but there are others, and it may be helpful to the select board or others attending next week's meeting.
Good point. We'll include that. Thank you. Gary?
Well, I don't plan on coming to that meeting, but, I was involved in lighting this, area when the town center was done over. We originally had metal halide lights, and then people on, Church Street were saying they could read the free press from their dining room at night of the lights. So we took them out, relamped them with incandescent. So my point is, we have the same cast iron bases over at the round church that we put in a couple years ago. And those are with LEDs, and you have a lot of options to change the heads on those to have as much light or as little, and it would be fairly easy. And if there's anything I can do to help that process, because I was the one that ordered them and everything, to line you with the companies that make those, I'd be happy to help out.
Gary, I hate to ask this because we're so off time, but I had thought, or I remember, or I was under the impression that we're in the airport right of way corridor, so we have restrictions as far as what we can do for lighting. Is that the case?
I don't know, but what we lamped over there, unlike these, were dark sky downlight, so.
Which is the responsible way to light. Anyway,
And you know, the bollard lights that were mentioned earlier, could be explored for parking lots and things, because they're really more about eliminating the walking path and not about lighting the entire neighborhood. There are a lot of light options that are out there.
Yeah. Denise?
Just real quick, Megan Andrews at the meeting 2 weeks ago, I thought had a great idea, and one I hadn't really thought about, but if we're really talking about safety, she was saying, and I haven't talked to any other business owners up on Bridge Street, but omitting the trucks that park diagonally that have the big bike rack on the back. You know, seriously, because you can't even get around them.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's just an ordinance that you would have to change, and I just bring that up to be thinking about it.
No, moving trucks off Bridge Street would have a huge impact on pedestrian safety.
They'll give a
I think
full-
she's talking about the parking and
The parking when you come in,
diagonal parking.
like they have to park down back
Right.
in the new parking lot. So just a thought.
Okay. Okay. D, follow up on petition regarding Bridge Street sidewalk project. Josh, did you want to head this one?
Well, we reviewed it at the last meeting, and I think the board wanted some more time to consider, as well as hear from potentially petitioners. But the advice at the last meeting was basically that our attorney for that petition does not need to move forward to a vote, because the voters don't have the authority to direct the select board how to spend on sidewalks. But there was sort of no action taken in the last meeting, and you wanted it to come back for some
Yeah.
further discussion, so.
My concern is we heard from people that they wanted things to happen, and I don't want to challenge the attorney, but I want to make sure that the complaint was heard and addressed. So,
Well, I mean, I think as was discussed last meeting, the board has made the motion to not move forward with the sidewalks. The general consensus from the petitioners seemed to be to not move forward with the sidewalks, but I'll.
Right, I'd just like to clarify, because I know people frown when they hear that the voters don't have legal right to. The petition is basically saying, don't spend already budgeted money.
right.
And as an example, a similar petition, although this would be an unlikely petition, could say, we, the town voters, direct that no further money be spent on zoning and planning randomly until it's gone through a town vote. 165 people would be sufficient to make that legal petition. And if we had the precedent that 165 people can say, stop spending money on anything, we would have to stop spending money on the planning and zoning department. So that's basically it in a nutshell. But so the voters can say they want, there are certain things the voters can say, and there are certain things that they can't say, because 5% of the people cannot override the entire town budget.
Karen?
I think the point that some of us in the community understood the petition as was, don't spend until you vote, have the town people vote on it. And I think the select board heard them to understand what the vote was, the purpose of the actual vote itself.
Yep.
So, and I think that petition actually went through Vermont League of Cities and Towns, to the Secretary of State. So whatever ill advice who drafted it, you heard them.
Mhm.
I'm a person that signed it. I heard you back. And I'm willing to withdraw my signature, and I'm pretty sure a lot of others are, if you need us to technically do that because you heard us and made action. I don't think the intent was ever to tell you to restrict you from doing budgetary spending. I think everybody saw it as a non-budgetary spend. It was more ARPA spend.
I think kind of where we're at is that, we don't want to, we've accomplished, the petition's accomplished what it wanted to accomplish.
Right.
We don't want to waste the time and effort of going through a vote. It also looks terrible, and I think it feels bad for me personally to say, well, legally, we don't have to, so let's not do it. So
Right.
we want it,
Thank
we
you for
want it,
saying
we
that.
want it to not happen, but because we don't want to waste time and effort. But I personally don't want to say, well, we're not doing it because legally we don't have to, because that's
It's not a good look.
it doesn't
So
feel
that's
right.
my point is.
Because
you
we want to hear the
you
petition, but
want
we don't.
somebody need to withdraw their signatures, and then it's a win for everybody.
Well, I
that'd
think
be-
that's the question, because I think the board, and I'm 20% of it, so I don't want to speak for the other 80%, but I think the board received the message and followed the will of the intent. But I've been told and I've seen that there's this idea of the select board said, well, technically, we don't have to follow that because our attorney said we don't have to in the end. And I just want to make sure that the petitioners realize that we honored the intent, and we don't want to say, well, technically, we don't have to do anything because our attorney said we don't have to do anything.
Right.
That's not the message that
I
I
understand.
want conveyed.
So if your attorney tells you what percentage of signatures that you need to have revoked and everybody's happy, just give me a number.
Well, my
Well,
question
we have to
is,
drop below 165, basically.
yeah,
160, I don't know how
the
many.
intent
Is
is the intent of the petition satisfied?
Is that enough to just say that?
Yeah.
Is there, so can we just say the intent of the petition was met, therefore
It's a moot point.
it's a moot point?
Yeah.
Okay,
Rather
not
than
even
arguing
address that,
about
because
the
that's,
mechanics of
that's
it.
too
I mean, I think,
Yeah,
I
we need to
think,
withdraw. That
I
is a
think because
waste of
it's not-
energy. It's already been a
Yeah.
waste of energy.
But if she,
So,
but she can post that, right? She can post that so that it doesn't appear like they're going.
Yeah.
like,
So-
happy to communicate
So
that,
I
but
think-
it can't be
yeah.
I
just
think that,
say-
no, I think that's okay. I think
So-
we're all working together to do it. I don't think,
Yeah.
I don't think we want the town to go through any more effort. We don't want
Right,
Right.
you to have to go through the effort to withdraw people. We want everyone to not have to worry about it because they accomplished the,
I
yeah.
just don't want the message to be lost in
Right,
translation. I
right.
think we all want the same thing, but there's this conception out there that the select board heard A, but chose B because they could.
So we've had a lot of people coming in to Richmond Community Kitchen and asking about it. And so are we gonna have a vote? Are we gonna have a vote? And every time we've explained exactly that the petition served its purpose. There's no need for a vote. We are pursuing other options for pedestrian safety in town.
That's beautiful. Would you
And
put that
so-
out there?
Yeah,
That's
yeah, I'm
beautiful.
happy to do that. So that's the language that we're using. It doesn't mean that we're hitting everybody, but
Yeah.
But
I
to
just
come
wanna
from
make
you and
sure
not from
that-
us.
again, it's a communication thing.
Right.
So I'm
I
happy
just want
to,
to make sure that you understand. that
we do
heard it,
understand. Yeah,
and We're trying to fulfill the intent,
yeah.
but I don't want it to get buried in the
150%
details.
we understand,
Okay.
yes.
Denise?
And I just want to echo what Amy said. I spoke with most of the businesses, and although some of them could not sign the petition because they were not legal Richmond residents, when we got to them the next day, and it was amazing because some of you had already gotten to them. Like, no, the select board members were already here. And like at the bank, when I went to the bank, they didn't want to get involved, but they were so thrilled and so excited. Somebody had already been in there to tell them, and they were just thrilled. And of the other businesses, when I told them, they were so thrilled. And the people that signed my personal petitions that I had, seeing them and telling them what went on, they were so appreciative of your board and that you listened and you took the time to discuss it. So there was nothing but kudos to you guys. I mean, I can only speak for my petition paper.
Well, I would appreciate if you as people communicate with you, please do talk up the next week's meeting. Because,
We already have.
because you've heard me till I'm blue in the face about how scared I am about pedestrian safety in this
Right.
town.
so
Dave?
Yeah. Linda, I think you were first, then Kathleen, then John.
There, I just want to throw out there that it takes 175 signatures on a petition to be given to the select board, and they had 307 good signatures. And I agree with the idea that the select board has heard the people. And the other thing, though, I have heard is, yes, they've heard the people, but for the moment, but will they, wait a few months and go back to the other one just because it can be done?
What do you mean go back to the other
That
one?
we could change your mind.
Oh,
That you can change your mind and say, 3-4 months down the road, well, we haven't heard from those people that were against it, so let's throw it out there again.
I just think our logical conundrum here is that, Linda, where that would take us is, let's have a vote, which our attorney says, A, we're not obligated to have, and B, is not legally binding.
I
which case-
really,
change it.
I just respectfully would like to say that I don't think you're understanding what I'm saying. And
Okay.
I'll talk it over to you in person because I don't think you're understanding the whole idea.
I think, and Linda, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Linda's saying, well, 3 months from now, we could reverse course and say the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Well, and technically that I believe is true, or a future select board, because it is under the authority of the select board, right? According to our attorney.
Right.
So if it's in the authority of the select board, I'm not trying to come up with another example.
Because we can. but
It
some-
is under,
if the governor has authority to do certain things under the law, unless you change the law, the governor still has the authority, regardless of a petition or a vote, which is then advisory.
I would say the odds of us
Yeah.
doing that so low as to be non-existent. You know,
Agreed.
I was saying to Bart earlier today that I miss having people call me up and scream at me. And,
I can give you some calls.
okay, yeah.
Find something else.
And so, yeah, that would be the one motivation if I just don't feel I'm getting enough punishment. But
Yeah.
otherwise, I don't think any of us are stupid enough to want to bring that pain on ourselves again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's
Agreed.
important to make the distinction of, well, technically we could, but
Oh my God, we'd be
what are the
stupid.
chances of us
Right.
doing?
But why would we is the
Yeah.
corollary question.
Well,
What do you-
that's what I'm getting to. That yes, the select board has, say, for example, the sidewalk issue. The select board has the authority to build a sidewalk any place they want. I mean, if they want to put it from here to there, whatever. But they do not have, for, like in this instance, with the cemetery being in the middle of that, the cemetery commissioners have the authority to whatever happens at the cemetery location. And if the select board has truly taken under consideration that 307 people actually signed that petition and others agree with it, then I would just hope that the select board would hear that, take it in consideration and say, thank you for your input. We understand that the way it is now, you know, it's going to put a business out of business and it's going to disrupt buried bodies. That you would say, okay, that's off the table now, and not kind of be sneaky, because some people would come back, and I'm not saying the five of you on there.
I think that's what we've done is we're kind of,
That is what we did.
That's what we did, is we acknowledged that we don't want to put a business out. We don't want to eliminate 4 handicap spots and 10 total parking spots, et cetera, and all that stuff. The only problem we have is we don't want to we don't want to make you and the whole town and everyone go through the effort of having this vote, knowing that
Right.
we've already reconciled all this, we've sorted it out. But we also don't want to come out and say, well, our attorney says we don't have to have a vote, and that's why we're not doing it.
Right.
We want to not have a vote
Right.
because we've all agreement we don't need to have a vote.
And furthermore, what he said is the vote, even if 80% of the electorate voted a certain way, it's non-binding. Because the voters don't have authority over this through a referendum.
So even a vote would not mean anything.
What the, but that
But
vote
it does, but it would
It
mean
would-
that we're not gonna do it.
It would
'cause we're
still
not-
be non-binding.
Yeah.
Right.
I think
We've
that's all
gotten-
that's a moot
we
point.
feel
We're not
bound
gonna-
already.
Yes.
So Kathleen,
Good way
then
to
John,
put it.
then Heidi.
And after Heidi.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I just wanted to bring up the idea of a precedent, and if a group petitions a select board to have a public vote, and you don't allow that to happen, then there are voices that, you know, you've already decided this, not everyone will agree with it, but there could be another topic where you have a petition and you decide that you're not going to allow a public vote. And it's just being really aware and careful about and articulate what reasoning you have for each one of these as they come, but I think is really critical.
Thank you, Kathleen. John?
Can I point out, I don't know if I'm talking to the right group or the planning commission, but there's been a lot of pushback.
Can't hear you, John.
John, you're not muted, but we can't hear you.
All right, maybe I've got a microphone issue.
We still can't hear.
Not
we can
working.
Just barely faintly hear you.
I'll throw it in the chat, how's that?
Okay,
Perfect.
so
Thank
you're
you.
putting that in the chat, Lisa?
Yeah, there's something nobody's talked about yet about the sidewalk is it didn't just come out of thin air. There were safety problems and
Oh,
the
yeah.
sidewalk was a solution, and maybe there are others I don't know, but that was proposed as a solution for those. So we don't have a sidewalk, and I don't have a problem with that. I know it was going to impact businesses and it had a lot of downside, but the safety problems are still
Still
there.
exists.
So we haven't done our job.
Well,
That's
That's
what
the
we're
purpose
talking
of
about.
the meeting on the
Wednesday's
24th.
meeting, yeah. So next
That's next
Wednesday,
week.
that's the,
That's the purpose of the meeting on the
Well,
twenty-fourth.
that's right, exactly. I mean, ask me.
Identify what
later.
those safety concerns are and then.
I've heard all the things I need to hear, but at the moment, right. That's what we need. I hope everybody focuses on
Yeah.
that. The safety issues are still there. Let's work on those however we can.
So I'm gonna just go back to Adam and Bart. In good faith, the select board has listened to the people. And they have made a decision and they are moving forward. And that's.
They're
pretty
not
much-
moving forward.
And they are not moving
Well,
forward.
there, we're meeting next week to talk about.
To talk about the safety for it.
Right.
so,
And I think that has been
I
documented.
have like a motion I wrote up that I think might work. So it's, I move to find that in collaboration with the petitioners, the intent of the petition has been fulfilled and no vote is now required.
There you go.
I don't think that's like a binding thing, but it acknowledges that we're all working together. So,
Right, it's basically what we call a sense of the
So can we get a
select board
second to-
resolution.
I'll second that.
Okay, so Adam made the motion, Bart seconded the motion. And I just want to say that I appreciate you making that motion because I've been yelled at and I follow traffic in Front Porch Forum. There is this impression out there that we were presented with a petition and we took the low road and decided that we didn't need to deal with it because our lawyer said we didn't have to.
yeah,
And that's not, I feel that's not an accurate impression for people to have. I think it's more accurate to say that people were concerned, they brought it to our attention, we listened. We had a cool-headed conversation and we all wanted the same thing, so that's where we got. So I appreciate you making that motion and I intend to support it. Any further discussion?
No, J.I.
all right.
Lisa, aye?
David, I.
Adam, I.
Okay.
We had to take it off. Maybe reconsider.
Oh.
Read those comments out loud, David, since we can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So John says, according to the current zoning, the businesses in the village downtown district are required to install sidewalks if they do any development. The affects the bank, NOFA, and the dentist buildings. Oh, this affects. If the select board decides not to install this sidewalk, will that requirement be removed?
I don't understand that at all.
So I think if they were to do any redevelopment, so as they said, they can exist as they are, but any redevelopment of the properties would require them to come into compliance.
Is it an unrelated question to the topic at hand about whether the town is going to install this?
Tangential.
This will be on their own property.
Yeah.
They're
I
saying
think
if
it's-
we're punting, should we go ahead and legally clear them of this obligation? I mean,
I don't think we're doing that, right? I
No,
mean, any
I don't think we
redevelopment.
need
So if the bank were to all of a sudden go away and become an apartment building with parking on the first floor or something.
I want to live in the vault.
So there would still, they'd be required to then put a sidewalk in.
Right.
Right,
As they exist now.
I've been to plenty of places in the US where you're driving on the street and you see 30 feet of sidewalk. Then there's none. Then a half mile down the road, there's 30 feet of sidewalk. Because those towns chose not to waive the requirement. And the hope was that there would be enough density of sidewalks that eventually people would support just tying them all together, but let's see how many we can get built for us first. That's, I think, what the question kind of gets to is,
Yeah.
shouldn't we just say, that's unrealistic, we're not gonna build the connecting stretches, so let's just make a change to the ordinance and say that buildings in the downtown district are not required to construct sidewalks should they do sufficient redevelopment to trigger that otherwise.
Which would be the planning commission's purview.
I don't have
Yeah.
a problem with
Yeah,
having a
that's-
hard surface out.
It's
front
not
of
our
the door,
purview.
you know?
I don't think
What's wrong with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else
That's
on
important.
the petition for the
It's funny
sidewalks?
how that works when we're funding it versus.
We're good?
redevelopment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
John still got his hand up. John, did you have anything else?
He,
So I assume that we're on E now? Okay. So E, consideration of response to VTrans regarding the Transportation Alternatives Program grant that was partially funding the southern section of the Bridge Street Sidewalk project. So this is the section from Town Center, the bridge?
so essentially from across the street from Esplanade up to Jolina Court.
Oh, okay.
So, because we're not moving forward with the project, that was funded by a Transportation Alternatives Program grant, which was paying for 80% of the design costs. And had a meeting with VTrans. they said that there's basically two paths forward. One is to say that we are momentarily pausing the project with the plan to pick it up in the future, and here's the date, and here's the path forward. I said, I don't think that's happening.
We move to find that, that'll cause a mutiny.
The other option is that the project is dead and no longer moving forward. At that point, we have to return, I think we've got about $8,000 or $8,100 so far reimbursement from the planning phase of this project. So that has to be returned to VTrans. They also have a charge for about $2,000 in administrative fees, because otherwise wouldn't be charged out if the project came to fruition, but because the project's not coming to fruition, they charge that. And then there are some other design fees that we hadn't yet submitted for reimbursement for before the project got put on hold or stopped, that we will now not get the 80% funding for. So they need a letter back to them stating that the town understands that the project is stopped and we are now going to pay the full cost of the engineering and planning to date.
And I'm looking at the explanation, the attachment, and I don't understand it. What's the money we're talking about? There's 3 different totals.
Yeah, let me walk you through that. Maybe I didn't make the greatest spreadsheet, but I'll try to explain.
So like Josh is pulling that up, my understanding is the funding on that was contingent on the project being completed. And
Right.
since the project is now not being completed, we're on the hook.
So can I
There's no subsidy.
point to one example? The circumferential highway, which they've been spending money on for what, 40 years?
Easily,
Something like
yeah.
that, 50 years? They never pulled the plug because it would mean you'd have to give all the money back that you already spent, which was in the millions of dollars. So some of these projects, I'm just making this editorial comment.
Yeah.
Some projects, you almost can't kill them because it was free money. And if you then kill the project, you have to give back the free money.
So do you kick it for 20 years?
Well,
It's like
the
that.
communication I had with VTrans was that we would need to give them a very specific plan on when we were gonna construct the sidewalk and the reason why. So like, for instance, this other project came up, we have to do that first. We're gonna get to the sidewalk on September 1st, and here's our plan going forward. That's not what we're doing here, from what I understand.
You can't just put it on hold temporarily and.
You can't just put on hold indefinitely.
Or indefinitely.
No. But by doing it this path, yes, it costs the town more money. It's all be paid for by ARPA funds essentially. But it basically ends the project without prejudice. They said this does happen. Projects do get put on hold as more public feedback comes through, so we're not alone. And when we apply for another transportation alternatives planning grant, they won't look at this as a check in the why not to give Richmond a loan or a grant in the future. They understand this happens. It's sort of a clean slate going forward.
We just have to pay for it.
We just have to pay for it.
Did you just say that the ARPA money could be used to pay for it?
Well, the ARPA money was the match. So I mean,
That's
we
kind of
probably need
how it'll
a
shake out.
motion from the board, but I would assume that we're gonna pay for the overrun with ARPA.
You actually have a budgeted line item for new sidewalks, so you should clear that line item first. Spend all the money out of that budgeted line item for new sidewalks, because that's what it was put in for, like 20 or either 20,000 or 35,000, something like that.
35,000.
You should clear that money first, use it out of there, and let your ARPA be for your other projects that you got planned, because you aren't planning any new sidewalks.
In the next year.
Yep, we
Correct.
could probably, we should maybe bring that piece of it back at the next agenda, just to make sure we have a warrant item on how are we gonna pay for the overrun.
That makes sense to me.
Denise?
I think that this is and Bart has mentioned this many times. I think this is a really unique case, and I think that maybe the town manager, our select board member, and our state rep should write a letter to the Secretary of Transportation stating, once we got into it, we didn't realize we might possibly be, uncovering dead bodies. We didn't realize we were going to be losing 5 handicap parking spots. And I think we should list all the reasons that you gave, and I think that they would, like, the $10,000 would go away.
Is that, do you have any sense of that, Josh? I mean, is that, I guess the only holdup I would have is that $10,000 isn't that much in the grand scheme of things for grant funding.
But I think it's
from
worth a letter try.
Was from VTrans, if it's gonna make it a pain in the butt to get grant funding in the future, that 10 grand could jeopardize us getting hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars.
I mean, we
going
could
forward.
try it and see.
See what the reception is.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's just a thought that I think if you did a personal letter
Mhm.
stating the 5 items that we're losing handicap accessibility, we're losing other parking in a vital downtown, we're, you know, possibility of the tree, you know, and then cutting the trees and
Bodies.
Yeah, I guess part of this is that
bodies.
those things probably all should have been caught during the scoping study, so we didn't get into engineering and design. And so that's kind of,
That's a good point.
it's kind of the entire point of a scoping study, right? So that,
Mhm.
To some extent, I mean, you don't really know a lot of the details until you get into the final engineering, and that's why they said this is, you know, it's not common, but it's not unheard of that projects get to this point. Things like this and other items and other projects come up and the town decides, well, no, this isn't gonna work for us, so. I mean, we could try a letter and see if that sways them. I think that sort of they're looking at this as black and white. We don't really care what the reasons are. You're not.
we just want our money back.
You're not constructing a sidewalk. The grant was to construct a sidewalk. We'll give it to somebody who's gonna make a sidewalk.
But I mean, I
I
think
mean, it's worth it.
also
We could try.
we have the evidence that we got a company in here to see if we could find out where the dead bodies were. And they were not able to tell us yes or no, that they could find them. I mean, we did try.
I think it's worth a shot. I don't think VTrans will care, so.
I suspect their hands may be tied around state and federal funding,
That's fine.
that it's probably regulatory, but I think we should ask, and then if we can't succeed or prevail, it's not, if it's my money, it's huge money, but it is unfortunate, but it is what it is.
It seems like it's also worth pointing out that the conclusion of that whole, of all this money being spent is whatever comes out of next Monday, that there are gonna be actions that are gonna be taken there, so even though it's not directly engineering design applied, it's still leading to changes in town, so
So why don't we give it a shot and come back to it the next time about our final resolution, whether we have any
I
leeway
would
in it.
agree, because it might be a, you know, a half an hour to write up this letter, here are the bullet points. And then if we are able to keep the 10,000, we've gained, and if we lose, it's a half an hour of labor.
And maybe
It,
just
it could be a win-win.
what Amy said, though, build
And
it.
Josh, I'm sorry to put more, half an hour of my time, I'm sorry, Josh.
Building into that letter, what Amy is saying, after the next meeting, to be able to say, this is what we would like to spend the money on for pedestrian safety. The following items, that would really go a long way.
We can try again. I think.
Yeah,
it's
it might
pretty
or
s-
might not.
I think it's
It's pretty
pretty specific
specific
to a sidewalk and a grant. I mean, they also said another option was we could change the scope of the sidewalk to say, okay, we're gonna do this segment, but not this segment. But again, I don't know that there's a segment in this project that we want to do. I don't know that we could transfer it to, instead of that, we're gonna do illuminated crosswalks and paint. I don't think that would be an acceptable change of scope. And we'll still have to go back through the grant approval committee to get that change of scope.
We do the 30
figured
feet
out,
between the
so.
handicap.
Yeah,
library
again, I
and
don't,
outside
this is
driveway.
specific to sidewalks. I don't think we're gonna be able to transfer
Yeah.
it to any other pedestrian
We'll
safety.
give it a
issues the
shot
way-
and
But we can write a letter and say,
we're right back where we started.
So are we on F?
sure.
So F is update on illuminated crosswalk installation on Bridge Street at Jolina Court and Railroad Street.
Yeah, so Pete was doing his due diligence at the end of the fiscal year and said we had to extend that line. And we looked back in the notes, and the note from the budget for this year was that we were gonna put an illuminated crosswalk on Bridge Street to go across Bridge Street from Jolina Court to Railroad Street. I'd actually forgotten that we made that decision, because I think prior we had made the decision to not do that, but then in that budget conversation, that's why it was specifically in there. So Pete is moving forward ordering that, and we can install it there as soon as we get it.
And mention that next week.
Yep.
There was discussion about putting it there or putting it further down.
It
and
could
there
be
was
too.
discussion about whether too many
Yeah.
put together were ineffective. Thoughts?
The Regional Planning Commission traffic engineers were clear that too many become ineffective.
Yep.
So too many is a relative term that they could define for us, but that's a reason to engage with them.
Well, that's
That's-
where, I mean, and that was when Pete came to me, that was a conversation that I remembered. I forgot that we had talked about it again in the budget. So I think we had that discussion a couple of times. And then in the budget meetings in 2022 said, No, let's put one on Bridge Street and let's put it in the budget. You could,
For
ma-
that
yeah,
location.
you could change the location if you'd like to. It's not binding, but we're buying it to fit it into this fiscal year and barring any objections, we'll put it in that location because that was the original decision.
So the counter argument to that is this is a pretty densely crossed section of Bridge Street, so arguably you could argue that it wouldn't be too many spaces so closely together. So my question is, should we go ahead and do that, or should we wait until a week from tonight and see what?
I'd like to wait till a week from tonight because I think part of the plan needs to be looking at trucks in front of Bridge Street Cafe, excuse me, I'm dating myself, Simone, Sweet Simone's Bridge Street Hair, I meant to say, because right now that illuminated crosswalk is almost useless in my opinion because
can't see it.
you can't see it. If we were to say in the town, downtown district zoning or what have you, wherever it controls parking, that those spaces are essentially for cars and not trucks, and they have to park around on Depot Street. That's gonna have a bigger impact than illuminated crosswalk in front of Jolina Court, because that's right now, the one we've got isn't accomplishing anything. I would assume so. I don't have a solution for how to unblock those spaces other than some kind of signage. Yeah.
The thing, I would say, wait until after next week's meeting. Get the ideas and then see where people feel that the pressure points are of safety.
Yeah.
And then potentially, because it's in this year's budget, so it could be potentially
Yeah.
along anywhere on Bridge Street is my personal
Well,
opinion.
is it in July's budget or is it in
In-
the ending of June's
I
budget?
think in June, but we're gonna buy it, so we have it and we can install it whenever you want.
Yeah, I think
That's
we
what
will
I'm-
use it, just
Yes,
a
we
matter of
will.
where.
Yeah.
I hope a lot of pedestrians come, and not just people who think they are, but.
If they can get here, if they can
There's
safely
process.
get here.
Pretty sure everybody walking is one.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they walk here, they are.
Anything else? Moving on. Boy, we're all the way up to G.
Gonna set a record.
Consideration of approving fundraisers to be held by the 4th of July Parade and Fireworks Committees.
Let's see, Jay, do you want to speak to this or is there anybody else from the committee? I can give the overview. Either way.
Give the overview.
Sure. So the Parade and Fireworks Committee would like to do 2 fundraisers on the 4th of July. They'll have a tent set up at Volunteers Green. One of them will be a 50-50 raffle where they'll collect the money and do a 50-50 raffle at the end of the day. And another one is basically just a donation drop box. Their plan is to have 2 committee members at the tent each throughout the entire day, managing the money, watching the money, and then depositing the money back in the town center, locking it up overnight, counting it the next day, and then they'll inform the 50-50 raffle winner how much they've won the next day, because they'll have that
Right.
amount counted, and mail out a check. So it's another fundraiser. They'll follow the same procedures basically that they would for a coin drop.
Right, and we just have to, I say we're in my July 4th committee now. We have to legally get permission to do that, even if it's just a Dropbox that people can do. The one logistical thing that I don't think we have, maybe we do, it's been a rough week to keep up an email, is we have to have a town employee take the money from us at the end of the night.
Yeah, I
And
think,
do we know who that's gonna be?
I think they're maybe reaching out to Linda. I might be around, and if neither one of us can help, I think they talked about using it.
Oh, and Stephanie is here.
They talked about using a
Thank you.
Dropbox up at the bank too, so I think we'll figure that out.
Stephanie is here from the July 4th committee. I didn't realize she
Maybe
was
she
here.
wants to talk to it.
Very
Yeah,
good.
I think we put that in there, so we're hoping that's okay with the select board, that we're gonna email the town staff, and if hopefully someone can meet us at the end of the day, and if not, we, in previous years, we've put the bank bag in the Northfield Savings Bank box, if that's okay with the select board.
Thank you, Stephanie. Are we ready for a motion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the 4th of July Parade and Fireworks Committee to hold a 50-50 raffle and donation collection at the July 4th festivities.
Ms. Bard, I'll second that.
Thank you, Lisa. Motion made by Lisa Miller, seconded by Bart Hill. Any further discussion? Hearing none, seeing none, calling the motion to a vote. Please identify yourself and signify your vote.
J.I.
Bart, aye. Adam, aye.
Lisa, I.
David, aye. Thank you. Wow, 9:12 and we're all the way up to I.
Eight.
Gotten so bad.
Yeah, sound fun, David.
Somebody pressed these in such a small font.
It's only an 18.
Must have been.
This
You
is,
ready for a motion?
well, Wanna read it, or do you
So
want me
I
to?
know, right?
We're on H. We just did G,
Oh,
was,
yeah.
see, there's too many Fourth of
Expenses.
Julys together. We just
Yeah.
did G, which was the fundraising. H is the reserve fund.
I mean, we spend it, we should let them have
Yeah,
it.
so H is consideration of approving expenses from the July 4th celebration reserve fund.
Yep.
Right, this is pre-approval. We have not blown $4,100 yet.
Yeah.
It's the correct total, yeah.
Blow it out.
So yeah, I'd be ready for a motion.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the use of $4,100 from the July 4th Celebration Reserve Fund for expenses related to the July 4th events as presented.
Is Bart, I'll second that.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Bard. Any further discussion? Hearing none, calling the motion to a vote.
Jay, aye.
Bart, aye.
Adam, I.
Lisa, aye.
And David, I. Thank you. Now,
Thank you.
consideration of
I just said thank you.
Oh, thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah.
So moving on to I, consideration of closing Esplanade Street, Bridge Street, Thompson Road, Far Road, and portions of East and West Main Street on July 4th. Okay. Does anybody want to speak to this?
Stephanie, that should be you.
Okay, yeah, I think we looked at it. These are the roads that were all closed previously in past years. You approved them all last year as well. The only thing that is important to consider logistically that impacts the town is just making sure that, I think this is how I phrase it, that what are we going to use to demarcate that those roads are closed? And letting, like, I guess a representative of each kind of area, whether it's the 4th of July committee or community member, know where they can get what to use. Because last year there was a problem. The folks the residents on Esplanade, I think I communicated with Josh saying, what do we use to show that the street is closed? But then, Josh isn't working on the 4th. Anyways, there were miscommunications. So if we can use town like barrels, if there aren't enough signs to go around, I think, common everyday residents who aren't on a committee or the select board need to know that there are barrels, or Pete can drop them off, or we get a sign. So that's the only part that's hard. But all of these streets did have permission to close last year.
Right, and to add a little bit to that, the confusion, we got a big sign from Pete saying road closed that we used to basically block cars that were coming up from Huntington Road from trying to go into Cochran or onto Bridge Street. And when we were done with that, when the parade was over, we had been told, put it here at the corner by the round church and it would be picked up. And then later that day or the following day, we got a call from the highway department going, where's our sign? And I'm like, and it turned out that people from Esplanade had come looking for a sign and had taken that one, and just no one got told. So it was not that there wasn't a sign available. The signs were needed at different times.
Yep.
It's just that we didn't have good communication.
Yeah, I'll coordinate with Pete and find out how many signs he has, how many barrels he has.
Yeah,
Maybe
the
coordinate
barrels
with
are gonna be-
Stephanie as far as where they're gonna be, at what location, and how they can get moved to Esplanade or other locations later.
Yeah, they've had experience at Esplanade of people just saying, there's people blocking my way, there's a sign blocking my way. I'm gonna park here and come hell or high water, and just trying to go through. So as many barrels or barricades as we can get there would be none too much. They're not, they can't, we don't want them parking in front of the houses and taking all the residents parking. But as was mentioned earlier, they're not legally allowed to park on the part of Esplanade down by the water and sewer treatment plants. They really shouldn't be there at all.
No, there's really nowhere to park on Esplanade.
Question for you. I know in previous years, you folks have asked for like the floats and that sort of stuff to park in our parking lot. Is that something that has been needed? We barricaded it off and it was like a simple witness tape thing, and the first person coming along, the grand marshal, would just rip it. And I'm just asking if that's.
Last year, mostly they would just keep on going down Thompson Road until there was a clear space, and then they would stop and then go down Far Road and out.
And I think that's part of it, because last year Thompson and Far were not closed.
That's what I was gonna add.
And that was part of the request this year, was because I think that some of the floats had a hard time parking there because parade viewers were
Yeah,
parking
the
there.
float were so wide and the cars parked there, they couldn't get
Yeah,
by.
so if we close that, then hopefully all the floats, and you guys are closer to it, but that was my understanding of the thinking process there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're,
And
Floats,
Heidi,
you know.
yeah. Heidi, I'll get confirmation for you on that. But yeah, I think this seems really petty, but part of this whole like missing sign saga and miscommunication is it whoever told someone on Esplanade to take the sign from Thompson Road messed up the whole parade. It then people didn't realize Thompson was closed, and so people parked there, and then the floats couldn't turn around. So as silly as it seems to like not know what signs go where, it actually messes with the entire flow of traffic, and does become a bigger problem. So yeah, Pete is critical, and then that communication piece.
Okay, I was just offering if that was something that was
Yeah.
moved happening, we were more than happy to do that for you.
And very generous. of you
That's
to take my-
fantastic. We'll let you know. Thank you, Heidi.
Yeah.
So where's the recommended parking spot for people that don't walk into town? I haven't driven to town in a decade to park for the 4th of July, but where are we encouraging people to park?
Volunteers Green, the parking lot.
So
at
Volunteers
top,
Green is
parking
open. for
lot
parking
here,
back
yeah.
there.
Oh, yeah.
Where have I seen people park?
Yeah,
The school,
everywhere.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
Baker Street,
So can
Sylvan
we put
Avenue.
up some better, can we communicate that? I mean,
Route 2.
I think we need to communicate that better because the part, the
That's-
parking, there's plenty of parking at the Green and it's never full. So it's
Stephanie,
not that there's not parking in around
can you
here.
put that
it's
on
people
Thursday
trying to
night's
find
agenda
their-
so we can make sure that gets communicated?
Yeah, and Linda has her hand up too, and I think Linda will say this better than I will, but Volunteers Green parking is only for handicap folks. But Linda, you probably know the rules better than I do.
We've always reserved the front section of Volunteers Green for the handicap placard people. And I'm just thinking that complaints that I received afterwards, after the 4th of July event, is I think that we need to really put out there, okay, here's where the parking can be, and do not use Esplanade, whatever. And say that they're closed, because when people came down for the fireworks, a lot of people were upset they couldn't go down Esplanade, and we sort of heard about it. So I think that the more publicizing where to park and where not to park is the biggest thing. And I think that it's always more contentious when it's time for the fireworks, because during the day people park, all places and all that, but it's the fireworks time is when they want to go down Esplanade. So we'd want to close that, at the beginning of the day, because you also want your cars to go down there for the car show.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. I just want to add for people maybe who haven't been involved in this forever, is Esplanade used to be open just all the time for all sorts of things. And the select board's been great at helping us get it more restricted, because it was one of the danger areas with a lot of fast traffic. So because so many people come in from other towns for our fireworks who don't live here all the time, or maybe skipped a few years, they may not realize that Esplanade is now closed. They get to the end and there's that chain across. And one of my questions is, I guess it's the second year that we're working with the town, is so around some of that communication, we don't have to decide this tonight, but like, what is the town putting out? What is a committee responsible for putting out, just as far as having the communication methods? Like, obviously we'll put out flyers and stuff, but it's good to for us to work together with our methods of communicating that, just for safety. And so Linda doesn't take all the complaints for people who say they couldn't park on Esplanade or wherever else. But Esplanade used to be one of the main thoroughfares for parking and traffic.
And I still have the approval for Front Porch Forum to do the Front Porch Forum on July 4th postings. And I get a certain amount of them for the town.
A paid part.
Yeah, the paved part's reserved for handicap. So is there any way we can designate the back soccer fields for parking or anything? I mean.
The back soccer fields will be where the fireworks are being set up.
And a car show.
Oh, okay, they're not set up across at fires anymore, is it?
Yeah, that's where that whole area back there is for North Star fireworks.
Oh, anywhere.
If Man and Machine wants a big red flatbed for a big red float, you're welcome to it.
Yeah, everyone wants me to work. I'm trying to do that at work.
It's free flatbed, you just have to get it running.
Oh, it runs.
Tutu around it. Tutu around it.
Yeah.
I have another
Red.
red flatbed, you can tow it.
What did you say?
I have a red flatbed too, so you can use the two of them. Maybe one will stay running, you can tow it in. You have brakes, I have engine, how's it?
Yeah.
I think Adam
we're-
brings up a good point, though. Maybe we could ask the parking group who has that QR code to their maps
Oh, that's a
to
good
maybe
idea.
put out some extra things, because yeah,
Yes,
John does that, I think.
There's a lot
Just
of people-
because,
Go ahead.
right, well, Lisa, you're right. I mean, people start parking and getting their spots at like 7 a.m. for the parade part. And so folks who don't come here to go rafting, they may not know about the extra parking areas. So yeah, if we work together with them, that thought just occurred to me.
That QR code, we
Go ahead.
actually have kind of permanent no parking signs we put up along the right-hand side of Volunteers Green to make sure people don't park there and narrow that road down to one lane. And we do have the QR code on those signs for you can't park here, but here's where you can park. So
Right.
we have started to put that out. I think, Linda, if we could put that same the sandwich board out that we use for the eclipse at the entrance, that might be a good sort of, here's a way to hit the QR
Yeah.
code.
And I bought, random tangent, I bought 4 sandwich boards for use for the coin drop there in the closet there.
Perfect.
And
Yeah.
so if we need to put additional messaging up around town, I've got 4 sandwich.
Yeah, we could just make a sign that says, need additional parking, scan QR code, and then you have the map.
Mhm.
So that could
Of
work.
course, the signs might grow legs and walk off, but
I don't think that I have those, Jay.
See,
huh?
Chris,
they grew legs and walked off.
Oh, great.
We've got it.
Chris took them.
Okay.
So we gotta.
We can, I'm sure, find
Waiting
it.
for a motion, David. This is a long one.
Yeah.
I move to close the following roads for the following times on July 4th, 2024. Jericho Road from the traffic light to School Street from 10:15 to 10:45. East and West Main Street immediate in
10:15 a.m. to 10:45 p.m.
Oh, AM. Yeah.
oh, sorry. So from 10:15 a.m. to 10:45 a.m.
a.m. Yep.
East and West Main Street in the immediate vicinity of the intersection of Bridge Street from 10:15 a.m. to noon. Bridge Street from the intersection of East and West Main Street to Volunteers Green from 10:15 a.m. to noon. Thompson Road and Far Road from 10:15 a.m. to noon, and Esplanade from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. with the exception of vehicles belonging to residents and water and sewer staff.
Thank you, Adam. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jay. And just a note, as we mentioned earlier, Thompson Road and Far Road are closed this year, but they weren't last year, so that's new.
Except of course to residents.
Yes. Any further discussion? Hearing none, seeing none, calling the motion to a vote, please
Aye.
identify yourself and signify your vote.
Art. Adam, I.
Lisa, aye.
And David, aye. Thank you. Okay, Jay, update from All Together Now in consideration of approval of the $2,000 funding request.
Yes. Hi, I have a different hat on now. We did have a youth and a staff member ready to chime in, but we got past their bedtimes. So it's finals week, last day. So really it's just if you have questions, you should have a motion on your piece of paper. All Together Now is requesting to use $2,000 from the Community Wellbeing Fund that the town has. The funds would be going towards stipends for youth to prevent mental health crisis and substance use prevention in the town. They're putting on events. We had a great booth at the farmers market this week. And they're having a pizza event for the last day of school at Stone's Throw. We've been working with the school board, and just the biggest update for this group is that we All Together Now was awarded $25,000 from the state Division of Substance Use Prevention. So one of the state official grants, and those are they can be recurring grants. And that was just for a 5-month period of time. That's all they were offering. That'll go through the end of fiscal year 2024, which is June 30th. And then we were invited to apply for fiscal year 2025, which is the full 12 months. And we applied for 50,000. We should hear this week if we get that, which would allow for 1 FTE. And the group is All Together Now is working with a program in Vermont called Up for Learning that works with the majority of the high schools in the state and all the middle schools. Does not yet work with MMU. So that's very promising. We'll come back there's a calmer time with data updates. I know you all love seeing the data. We have data on number of youth impacted and some of the youth risk behavior survey and hopefully the award grant and collaboration. So you all have been really supportive for the last several years, but open to questions.
Thank you, Stephanie. Questions? I guess we're ready for a motion.
That's a question.
Sure.
I'm a little confused. Is this funding already in the budget? Is this, what, I don't know, once you first started talking, I don't know where it was coming.
Yeah, so we have a community well-being line that was budgeted for $5,000 for FY '24. We've spent $2,830, leaving $2,169 left.
Okay, and that, the program that we're talking about, are these Richmond youth, or is this a community program of multiple other communities for this $2,000?
Stephanie?
You want me to answer that? Or, yeah, so this community well-being fund has been in the Richmond town budget for 2 or 3 years maybe. So anyone can apply to use some of these funds for community well-being. And so we're applying to use a portion of the funds. And altogether now does provide community mental health and substance use prevention for the 5 towns that feed into the MMU school district. We make the same requests for funding support from the other 5 towns. And then they all participate in varying levels. For FY '25, there's $1,000 from Bolton. I can't remember where Huntington is at. And so people either have financial contributions, board members, select board members who sit on our board, most people have the resource directory, most towns on their websites too. There's different ways to participate.
So how does this differ than the other nonprofit charities that we quoted for the first? I'm only trying to understand how the pieces fit together. I'm not trying to poo-poo anything here. But we had a list of charities that we were asked as taxpayers if we wanted to support and vote for. How is this different than that? And why is this now, why would we not shift this to that list for next year's budget?
I mean, I think the genesis of this was that it was money that was sort of outlay, as Stephanie said, it was $5,000 in the budget that could be used for any project that anybody came forward with for community well-being. It just so happens that the only organization or person that's come forward with any request has been Stephanie with the All Together Now project that she's been working on for a number of years. I think the board could certainly consider, do they just fund All Together Now on an ongoing basis in the budget through the same process? But that's the genesis of where it is. This is sort of where we're at now.
So any nonprofit can ask Richmond for part of that $5,000 for community well-being.
Yes, as long as they have a program that's serving Richmond residents.
And the first, you've already spent 20 something to 200.
Yeah, 2,830, and I think that was also an All Together Now request, if I
So
recall
the full
correctly.
5,000 will technically be going to, or 4,800 will be going to All Together Now. Okay.
So Kara, I would, sure, those are good questions. And I do think since this was approved by the voters, and it is open for anyone to use, and it's in the town budget and it's public, so anyone can use it.
I just didn't think anybody, I'm somebody who looks at the budget and didn't realize that that was the case, is that people should be, and we aren't advertising that people should be applying for the grant to use this $5,000. So I support work you're doing, Stephanie. Don't get me wrong. I just think this, the whole thing with us being transparent with the other charities that we were donating to, technically you're a nonprofit, correct?
We just became a nonprofit. Before we were not anything. Thank you. Yeah, we were just a group of people trying to do something with no landing page.
I'm just.
There was just community members trying to work together.
Future years, and that other people have to do it a different way than what All Together Now is doing it. So it's not really.
So we could, not more broadly speaking, we could deal with all this, but we could choose next year to fund All Together Now through a budgeted item directly, and then we could either adjust this grant amount or keep it or whatever, and then encourage other organizations to apply for it.
Yeah.
And by next year, I mean, when we build the budget for the following July.
Max.
But it makes total sense. It makes total sense that just lets us taxpayers say, yeah, we're in favor of something, and we don't even need this line item, so that they don't have to come back to the select board to get approval, like she's had to do probably twice now.
Yes.
It's not necessary.
I have one question. So these are for Richmond residents, Stephanie?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
We can, yes, sorry. And like Huntington makes us show like what percentage of the programming you're doing goes to Huntington, what percentage goes to Bolton. And that's where I'm saying, like, in a different meeting, I can show you our data. We're just, since grant years end on June 30th, we're in those final stages of gathering all the data. But at the last report I showed, brought in a data report, and like that community wellbeing resource directory that's on the town website, we can see of the number of people who look up, where can I get support for mental health? Where can I get support, substance use, intimate partner violence? We can see how many of those people, what percentage are from Richmond, what percentage are from other towns, those sort of things. So we do have data to support that's going to Richmond residents.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Ready for a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve an expense of $2,000 from the community wellbeing budget to support the youth interns and community programming of All Together Now.
Thank you, Lisa. Do we have a second?
Adam, I'll second.
Thank you, Adam. Any further discussion? Hearing none, seeing none, calling the motion to a vote.
Jay, aye.
Bart, aye.
Adam, aye.
Lisa, I.
And David, I. Moving right along. Dun, 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 dun. Consideration.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, Stephanie. Next is consideration of establishing a police canine restricted reserve fund. And this is for our new
Duke the
pooch.
comfort dog. Yep.
John Wayne.
And there's a brief explanation, which
Yeah, so Corporal Cohen, when he was in Williston, set up a nonprofit to fundraise for Duke. That money that was fundraised was then donated to the town directly, and they had a separate reserve fund set up for care and feeding of Duke, the comfort dog. There's still the balance of funds in that reserve fund in Williston. They're going to keep, I think, most of it, but I don't know what the full balance is, so I can't say most. But they are going to transfer $2,000 to Richmond as sort of a starter fund for Duke, which is kind and generous of the residents in the Select Board of Williston. In order to receive that, we should set up a reserve fund that can also receive this donation and future donations, because Corporal Cohen's goal going forward is to establish a similar program in Richmond to pay for the care and feeding of Duke, the Comfort Canine. So the request of the Select Board this evening is to establish the Police Canine Restricted Reserve Fund, and it would be basically restricted as it is fundraising donations specifically for the care and feeding of Duke, the Comfort Canine.
Oh, heck. Mr. Chairman, I move to establish the Police Canine Restricted Reserve Fund, which receives donations for Duke.
Second.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Jay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, calling the motion to a vote.
Jay, aye.
Bart, aye.
Adam, aye.
Lisa, I.
And David, I.
Did you get the 2,000 in this fiscal year or next fiscal year?
Yeah.
Maybe this fiscal year. I think they made the motion, I think, at their last meeting, so we might see a check.
Just check it.
Yeah.
Next is follow up on calling a special meeting for creation of special projects reserve fund and form of voting for the annual budget.
Yeah, so sort of two items here to talk about as far as calling a special meeting. The first one came up was, should we hold a special meeting to consider moving the budget to Australian ballot from a town meeting ballot? And some of the questions came up, well, could we do that? And if that passes, are we able to split the budget up into segments? So we want to vote the highway budget separate for everything else? Well, yes.
Highway
right?
police and everything
Yeah,
else.
you're able to split it up as long as it goes on Australian ballot. You can split it up if you would like to. Same way as you could on in-person ballot. You don't have to specify that in the form of voting. I asked about the charitable appropriations that we just talked about. Right now, those are from the floor. If we just moved the budget to Australian ballot, you would need a separate question to move those charitable appropriations to Australian ballot, because they're not specifically part of the budget. They're sort of a separate question. So the guidance from the attorney is you would need to create a separate question. Should we move those to Australian ballot? Should you want to move those to Australian ballot? You could also create another question, because if you move the budget and charitable appropriations to Australian ballot, well, there's not a lot left to talk about at town meeting. So you could have a question to ask, should we move all of the public questions to Australian ballot? And if you ask those three questions and everything goes to Australian ballot, then you've got an Australian ballot instead of a town meeting. Or you could
You can have a town meeting to present reports and answer questions.
you could, yeah, but all your voting would be on Australian ballot. So you could do all three of those questions. You do one of them, none of them. But you could, they could, and if you do all three of them, doesn't mean all three of them are gonna pass. So I think what I'm looking for is sort of guidance on what would the board like to see. We can start to draft a warning, and because Linda's suggestion was do it like a Saturday in September, October, November, where people are back from summer vacation. We still have some time now to kind of figure out a warning, get that warned. I think we need to warn it not more than 40, not less than 30 days out.
Yeah.
So we have some time to, and it's gonna take some time to craft the exact language that the board is happy with and that is legal.
Yeah, we had good turnout at the Saturday morning special meeting to move town meeting back from Monday night to Tuesday. I mean, the room was full, so I think people will come.
Yeah. And then the other question to consider on this special meeting is to deal with the ARPA funds, as we talked about a few meetings ago. We're not going to hit the deadline by the end of this calendar year to have those funds committed or under contract. That's the same thing, under contract or spent. So the way to work around that and extend the life of the ARPA funds is for the board to make a motion to move the ARPA funds into the general fund, pay for government expenses, which would be ostensibly payroll and associated expenses. And then hold a special meeting for the voters to decide on, do you want to establish a special project reserve fund and then transfer an amount that would basically be equal to what we transferred into the budget, into that reserve fund. And the guidance of VLCT and our accountants is that that has to be a voter established reserve fund, hence the need for the special meeting.
Everybody got all that?
Yeah, sorry, it's kind of a lot.
Karen?
As one who was trying to push you to go to Australian ballot for all budgetary decisions, I would love to see the first two that Josh discussed, which is anything monetary, to go to Australian ballot, so it's not limited to the people who can have the day off in the room, that you're more inclusive and allowing more people in the community to vote on numbers that impact them, so you get a truer picture of what your citizens are really looking for in spending. I think some people are gonna be pretty surprised when their tax bills get to them this year, so they're gonna wanna know more about what you're doing on your budgets and gonna wanna participate more. I like the idea of still having town meeting, and like Jay just said, presenting the report, being able to ask questions, and possibly even discussing what the budget process is like, and educating, having that opportunity to say, this is when we take input, this is when we build these budgets, this is what we do for meetings, so that people could ask those questions and better understand it. So I really would love to see the numeric things, money voted on, but still having a town meeting where people can talk and discuss and learn more about. I mean, you can even ask questions on things in the budget, as far as what something is. I think that's still allowed at town meeting. You just don't discuss certain aspects, I think. So that's what I'd love to see as far as the ARPA money goes and that special reserve fund. I think you don't have a choice. I think you have to do that or else you're going to lose your ARPA money. But my concern is the restrictions that you put on that fund and what you're going to do with that fund. So it just doesn't become another big savings account that we're just buying CDs and earning interest on, when our community actually has needs that we should be using the funds for. That's my point. Yeah.
Eddie?
I mean, I agree. I think we're at the time now, everyone's working and times have changed. And I do think that having Australian ballot, it brings in more people. And unfortunately, because I enjoy town meeting, but I do think, as you said, Jay, by having it discussion or a couple days before or whatever.
No, I got the purchase agreement, but she filled out a credit application. And
Wasn't me. Wasn't me. So, but Josh, I mean, you doing the presentation, I think that's very helpful for the community too. In having that open forum.
So I think that the budget presentation would then be at a public information meeting prior to Australia. So it wouldn't be actually at town meeting.
Exactly, that's what I'm
Oh,
saying.
sorry, I missed that part of it.
That's what I'm
Muting
saying.
somebody.
Yeah, it wasn't I wasn't looking.
No, but yeah, that would happen. We would hold that on like.
Did you do a really good job explaining?
Yeah, we'd hold that in an evening within 10 days of the Australian ballot vote. And then we might actually be a little limited on what we can actually discuss in town meeting on an Australian ballot item, as we sort of learned last year.
Yep.
But yeah, I agree. Yeah, there's a lot of outreach we can do prior to town meeting on the budget and other items.
And then the ARPA, I would like to just address on the ARPA, and I have spoken to you privately, Josh, in regards to that is if we are voting on that, the further we vote it out in the year, the projects that are potential, there's less money on the table. So we know fiscally where we're at, I think is important, to kind of, I know, what is it December 31st or did they change it?
December 31st, haven't
Okay,
changed it.
so, you know, you don't want to get into the holidays, but if we can do, and that's why I was even saying, is it possible to do it during the election? Because there's so many people out that day.
Only problem with, so
No,
Linda,
sorry.
before Linda raises her hand, I think if it were to be an Australian ballot item, then Linda would approve, yeah, let's do it during the election, but because it's an in-person meeting,
Okay.
it's really hard to do it during the general election.
Got to do them all together. You can do the moving to Australian ballot vote along with the art reserve fund vote at the same
At the same,
warrant hearing.
at the same special meeting, yes.
Special meeting. Thank
But
you.
I would not do it on whatever it is, November 4th for the
You know,
special election.
like September.
September,
I'm
October,
thinking-
November, you could pick a Saturday and
Yeah.
let's start to craft it and strategize.
Jean?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I wanted to make a comment that Stowe, at this year's town meeting, Stowe voters voted to have their budget voted on Australian ballot. So I don't know if you guys know anybody from Stowe and can figure out what they're gonna do about town meeting. I don't know if they're gonna continue to have the town meeting or not, but they have moved their budget to Australian ballot.
I believe there's an article in 7 Days this year that noted that an increasing percentage of towns are doing it this way, that fewer and fewer towns are bothering to have anything in person. And so.
And the
they-
other thing
they're probably locked in.
the other thing I wanted to say was we have the town meeting in the Richmond Campbell's Hump Gymnasium, and that gymnasium doesn't even have the capacity to handle all of the voters. So if it was just, you know, a weird year and all 3,300 registered voters showed up, they couldn't even fit into the gymnasium. Just a comment. That gymnasium can hold 750 people.
Since we got 120 people at town meeting last year and 160 this year. I don't
Yeah, well,
think
you
that's-
never know.
Never know. But to the point of town, if we want guidance on what people are doing with their in-person town meeting when they moved everything to Australian ballot, there's no shortage of towns out there that have done this.
Yeah.
VLCT would probably have a policy paper on what others have done. It would be worth asking.
Do you want to see a draft agenda, start to wordsmith and strategize a date?
I think so. It seems to me we're moving in this direction, so we're talking about after the vote, what happens. Let's deal with the special meeting and the
Yeah.
vote, right?
And then do we put all three questions on there for now, so you guys can still add, subtract?
Both plain side.
There you go, okay.
Was it 3 questions or even 4?
Well, sorry, I meant 3 questions for town meeting and then the two, so it'll be 5 total.
Yeah.
Three related to town meeting vote and then 2 related to ARPA.
Thank you, everyone.
And next, the item we've all been waiting for.
Da-da-da. M, consideration of making appointments to the Water and Sewer Commission. So Adam and Lisa, this is your opportunity to say, me, I really, really want this,
Been
please,
drooling the
please,
whole
please.
time.
Are either of you two even slightly interested?
It's my background. I mean,
Right now, there's 3 of us and 2 members of the public who have 2 customers who have both applied to be back on it. So the seats are all filled if we just keep people on, but if you would like to be on it, I'm sure that David or Bard would, I enjoy doing it because sewage, but
What's not to like?
yeah.
That nitrogen cycle is great.
Yeah.
I don't have time realistically to do that, so.
honestly, it's one of the few things that I've got expertise in, kind of related field, but unlike most of the stuff we do, so. Makes sense. You want out?
Sure. I'll still attend the meetings. I'll just sit over here.
I think
But at least in all
you need
seriousness, if you want us to put you on the committee, now is your time because we got motions to make.
a binding to it of 3 of rock, paper, scissors. Is that how?
They take too long.
David
I would
spoke
do it.
first.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to nominate Lisa Miller for, I move that we appoint Lisa Miller to a 1-year term on the Water and Sewer Committee mission.
Adam, second.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Adam. Calling the motion to a vote.
Jay, aye.
Bart, aye.
Adam, I.
Please abstain.
David, I. I mean, congratulations.
I move to appoint Select Board Member Bart Hill to a 1-year term on the Water and Sewer Commission.
Adam, second.
Calling the motion to a vote.
Jay, aye.
Bart, abstain.
Adam, I.
Lisa, aye.
David, I.
I move to appoint Select Board Member Jay Fur to a 1-year term on the Water and Sewer Commission.
I'll second that.
Abstain.
Bart, aye.
Adam, I.
Lisa, aye.
David, I. Congratulations.
I move to appoint Aaron Farr and Morgan Williver to 1-year terms as customer representatives on the Water and Sewer Commission.
I'll second that. Lisa.
Aye.
Bart, aye.
Adam, I.
Lisa, aye.
David, I.
One other comment, and the last one, you should know that Morgan is chair and Aaron is vice chair, so.
And Aaron would be happy to stay as vice chair or become chair. I have
Yeah.
not heard from Morgan.
That can be decided in
Yeah.
2 weeks.
That's right.
I think Morgan's done a fine job, and I think Aaron has brought an enormous amount of common sense and expertise to the committee. We've been lucky to have both of them.
Agreed.
Agreed.
And
And those of you who don't come, you just don't know what you're missing out.
A lot of fun.
You bring samples to the product.
Well, especially since this is our 20-year,
Yeah.
a lot of stuff is going down.
A lot of stuff is going. Update on bill to create uniform ethical standards in local government.
So last I checked, this was passed by both branches of the Vermont legislature and is headed to the governor for signature. I don't know that he signed it just yet, but he does sign it. It'll go into effect on January 1st. And at that point, there'll be a new code of ethics that applies to all municipalities. There'll be training from the state, from VLCT on that code of ethics. So right now we're sort of in a little bit of a wait and see. It does seem likely though that it will pass.
And the State Ethics Commission has a significant authority for training and guidelines and stuff, so. One could anticipate other people will be telling us like how to get trained, what it means. That's really just an
An
update, right?
update, yeah. It had come up a couple meetings ago.
Which brings us to O.
6 of the 7 vetoes have been overridden, but I don't know. That was one of the bills that was vetoed. Okay. Review code of ethics policy.
So in the meantime, we do have our own code of ethics policy that the select board updated last August and should be reviewed by all committees of the town in an open meeting every year. So this is the chance for the select board to review it. I can kind of hit some highlights if you would like. I trust you've all read through the code of ethics. But the purpose of the policy is to ensure that the business of the town of Richmond will be conducted in such a way that no signatory will gain a personal or financial advantage from their work for the town of Richmond and to preserve the public trust. It is also the intent of this policy to ensure that all decisions made by signatories are based on the best interest of the town. It goes on to talk a lot about conflict of interest, direct financial conflict of interest, direct personal conflict of interest, how to avoid conflicts of interests. Talks about prohibited conduct, if there is a conflict of interest, or gifts or favors are offered, how to, what you can and cannot take. Incompatibility of offices, so there's certain things that you can't be on the planning commission and on the select board. There's a list of incompatible offices, as Lisa knows, she had resigned from the planning commission to be on the select board. There's an article on disclosure if you do have a conflict of interest and how to recuse yourself from that conversation. And then there's also a process for a complaint of an ethics violation, either against a staff member or against a committee member. It's outlined very clearly in the policy how somebody in the public may make that complaint, and then there's an article on enforcement once the complaint has been made, and that authority rests with different commissions depending on who the complaint was made against. It's a very brief overview. It's but everybody has to read it on the committee, and there's a sign-up sheet that you all get. And I think this year, just breaking out of the select board mode for a minute, we've got a really good response. Duncan's been really proactive in following with committees, asking them to discuss it in a public meeting. And he's gotten a lot of signature sheets in years past. We get some, but not all. So I think the volume has increased quite a bit. So thank you, Duncan, for leading that charge, and for all the committees for taking it seriously and reading through it.
I have been pleased when I've attended other committees to see that, the open meeting law stuff and the ethics stuff does get mentioned and does get taken seriously.
Yep. I'll put it into when I pass everything around for warnings.
Awesome. You want to take up the administrative staffing follow-up?
Sure. So this is a follow-up on the conversation we had last week where I outlined a number of items that could probably use more attention and the increased workload. The select board correctly noted that this is not in the current budget nor in the FY25 budget. So perhaps a temporary position would be more appropriate with consideration of a full-time position in the next budget, which I think does make a lot of sense. So we're not like hiring somebody and then it goes down in the FY26 budget. So come back with a draft job description of the packet. It would be for 12 months. The estimated total payment would be about $34,000 to $36,000 for this position for 25 hours per week. And this would take us through the end of June of FY25. We could use ARPA funding because you can pay for payroll to pay for that for this calendar year. And I think I incorrectly stated in the memo that we could continue that into next calendar year. I don't think that we actually could. We'd have to get some more clarification on ARPA because it has to be obligated or spent by the end of this calendar year. So if this were approved, it would essentially be an overspending of a budget line, but there are frequently other vacancy savings in other departments that could potentially make up for that. So I put a draft
Motion.
draft job description in the packet. And just to sort of summarize, if approved, it would take some of the grant management work off of my plate and also free up some time for Duncan Wardwell to pick up some more special projects, taking some more time off of my plate. Increase the amount of time he spends on working for reimbursements from FEMA, insurance, federal highway program for the July 2023 flooding, and work on more complicated requests for proposals, assisting in developing and managing a better grant management system, focus on assisting departments implementing safety procedures with the LCT, and assist Finance Director Connie Bona with some more help on payroll and accounts payable. So I sort of designed a position to take some special projects off of my plate and then free up some of Duncan's time so he could focus on some other projects as well. And then my plan would be see how this goes, come back with a recommendation in the fall for a more permanent position to be added to the budget.
This position would report to you,
Yes.
and you have discretion over what they work on, essentially.
Yep.
as needed.
Yeah, within the, I mean, I have a pretty good outline in the temporary job description, but also added it in line for, other projects as assigned, as you normally would. But I think it would be all along those same lines of managing some of these shorter term grants, and helping to pick up some things. Like I would probably try to transfer the minutes over to this person. So Duncan, who's proven himself very valuable in the FEMA process, would have some more time to spend and hopefully get through those processes a little bit quicker.
Job might pay for itself.
There is some potential that it could help out with some of that, yeah.
Well, Mr. Chairman, as you know, from discussion we've had over the years, trying to keep Josh from
Bursting
into flames and going away to be a beachcomber in Mexico. When we reviewed his workload, it's clearly not possible to do all that we're currently asking him to do within the confines of a 50-hour week, let alone a 40. And Duncan, has been kept busy. I think that, as I mentioned a couple meetings back, the town I worked for in Virginia, we had a formal town manager and assistant town manager, and there was, in a town not much larger than this, there was plenty of work to be done. If we're seeing work getting haphazardly done or not done at all because we have not enough hands to do it, that's not good for the voters of Richmond when things are just not getting taken care of. So I would support this, as you've said, for a temporary basis now, but to explore whether this should be a permanent position. And, documenting for the voters, what grants were we able to get because of this person writing for them and stuff. I think it's a good idea.
And a lot of it too would also be, just to be clear, like a lot of it is grants that are already in process. We have a lot of grants that have already come through.
Yeah.
And it's management of those grants to
Right.
make sure that we're doing the work and then tracking it all to make sure that we're getting reimbursed correctly and keeping track of all those various grant paperwork. But some of it certainly it could allow us to help apply for some additional grants because there are certainly things that we see come across the desk that we just don't have time to apply for, and it might be some really low hanging fruit if we just have the time to do it.
Well, first I want to note that Stephanie also has her hand up, but I was going to note that I think doing this on a trial basis makes sense, but then to be able to articulate to the voters what the need is, what the sort of performance measures are that show that we're operating more efficiently or generating more revenue, to be able to describe it. Because I think for those of us closer to town government, including the town manager, it's probably clear when we see the list of things you do. But for people outside this group, it's probably more obscure. So that would seem to me to be something that we'd want to take up, like what are the costs and benefits of this for a voter consideration in a future budget?
Yep, makes sense.
Stephanie?
Sorry, I had to find unmute. I've actually had my hand up since the code of ethics, so we can wait.
Sorry.
We want to go back to it. I will say I agree with what Bard said. That when it goes to a vote, I think that's going to be really important. And almost, I'm thinking back to the 3 columns, the 3-column and box chart that was on the Western Gateway Scoping Gateway study to almost show like Josh does these 4,000 things. And if we can slide some of these boxes onto Duncan or whatever, and then this new position does this, and where does finance fit in? I think that would really help people because people don't understand the full scope of how complex it is. But I can wait. I just want you to know that I had something to say on the code of ethics discussion.
Well, why don't you go ahead and say what you wanted to say about the code of ethics discussion?
Okay. Thank you. So my question is just that I was recently, based on some conversations, actually looking at the code of ethics policy, which I too have to sign every year. But my question just for this group to maybe take under consideration, you don't have to talk about it now, is I was curious what precipitated some of the changes between 2019 and the one from August of this year. And most specifically, the change that I'm asking about is that I noticed that there was a strong mention of these five specific components or values in the old one, and they really focused on the select board members having their priority be public trust and showing respect for citizens, and that those are not in the new version. And I agree, I like the new version, and it's about conflict of interest, financial and legal, but I felt like what was missing is representing the public trust and respect for citizens, that it feels like that got dropped. And I didn't know if that was intentional or not.
I'm not sure about that specific piece, but this new policy came largely out of the sample policies from VLCT. So I think we tried, I know Connie reviewed it, I think perhaps with Lisa, and you tried to merge the two documents as best we could, keeping what we wanted to from the old and adding this to the new. That said, it may not have gotten it perfect. There might be some new things to revise and revisit. So I think maybe what a good next step would be is to sort of wait and see where the statewide code of ethics goes. And if that does not proceed, then we can revisit this and see about making some changes. Otherwise, it's moot and will be changed in 6 months anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a good, once I heard that there's gonna be a statewide one, but I did want to just say that was something noticeable as I'm just kind of mediating. So I'm sorry, Lisa, were you going to say something?
Yeah, Stephanie, I think the state is generally more concerned with things that can be quantified or identified rather than attributes or, softer skills. The soft skills are probably the most important ones, actually, but the ones that get violated are the firmer ones. And that's really what they're looking for. I hope we throw one out for the other.
Yeah, I agree. And I had a feeling that's probably why it got taken out. And Bard knows about results-based accountability. Probably others of you do are SMART goals. So I figured that's why it's taken out, but I would say, if there's a way to get some of that sentiment back in, even though it's not quantifiable, I think it will make a difference during tough votes or during tough times when I know that you have some hard decisions in front of you and things like the special meetings coming up and some of the things we're talking about and framing that when those things are noticed, it's helpful to have that in there, even though it's not quantifiable. So, but I know it's also potentially a moot point.
I think it was a great conversation. I was just flashing as I was contemplating ethical behavior, the photographic image of one legislator pouring a bottle of water into another legislator's bag
For 6
in the
months.
State House.
Oh,
Yeah,
I don't know what the ethics policy. in
I
the
know,
future
right?
will say
You
about
can't.
that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, and I don't want to go off topic. Like, right? Yeah, look at our modeling nationally. But anyways, that's enough of that. I just wanted to just speak that since it came up. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for bringing it up. Kara, did you have a question?
Actually, I wanted to speak back to the administrative position, if that's okay.
I was about to go there.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding what we're doing here. We're shifting some of what's on Josh's plate. We're shifting it to this potential temporary position. We're also shifting some of Josh's stuff to Duncan and some of Duncan's stuff to this new temporary position. Now, is Duncan full-time or part-time?
He is full-time, 30 hours a week.
Okay, he's 30 hours a week, but he gets full-time benefits.
Correct.
Okay. This position that you're proposing, is it part-time with benefits? Is it just a temporary position? So it's just straight pay?
Yeah, it's just temporary hourly, no health benefits, 25 hours a week.
Okay, great. I just wanted to, and this position is going to be called, what was the title of it?
Administrative
Administrative
assistant.
assistant,
Okay, administrative assistant. What's Duncan's title?
assistant to the town manager.
Do we not just call him assistant town manager? Does it have to be two?
Well, I think that's gonna be, that's gonna be part of my thought process as we get into the next budgeting cycle is because we used to have an administrative assistant.
Right,
Those duties started to increase a bit, but not quite maybe to the assistant town manager. So we went with the Dunder Mifflin assistant to the town manager, which sort of seemed to fit the job duties. But now, I think we could argue we probably need an assistant or deputy town manager, which seems to be very much similar, and then an administrative assistant in there. But I think that's an FY26 discussion.
I appreciate that clarification. We're going the same thing at my office.
Yeah.
Try to just titles, what they all look like, how they all fit together and what it means to that external viewer versus the internal understanding of it. So this position, you said 25 hours a week?
Yeah.
What's the hourly rate proposed? I want to see if it's realistic.
23 to 24.
Right.
23 to $24 an hour.
Thank you. I think that's realistic. I just wanted to make sure you guys were in
Yeah.
realistic.
And I put that on the same grade as other assistant positions that we have in town. So I think it's a grade 3. I should have it in front of me, which is assistant to the chief of police and assistant to Linda. So I had to put in the same
Last question.
level.
So I won't keep you guys any later. Last question has to do with the whole grant side of things. Is tracking the grant financially and how that's going, and what you're trying to do is switch that to an assistance role and not have it be at your level because you've been doing it versus a finance director tracking. Other towns have their finance director track the grants and keep track of it through a system. There are actual systems that software that you can use to do it and make your life a lot easier. You can scanning in the invoices and it categorizes it, those kinds of things. So you might want to investigate not just human investment, but software investment as well. That's a key piece to the puzzle for even why would you have a spreadsheet when you can have something that's more powerful, do it better and more efficiently. because spreadsheets, you can have data entry errors with calculations, etc. But my question was really about when we went to a full-time town planner, the town planner was supposed to be going after grants. That's what was one of the justifications for bringing in a full-time town planner, was to help us chase, I'm gonna use the word chase, because you never know if you're gonna get it or not, chase grants. So I would want to understand if that's not happening on the town planner side of things, and we had a full-time town planner and a full-time zoning administrative officer, I think was how things were being built. I want to be very clear with, if we have grant expectations, but that's a very difficult thing to do, that are additional grants to justify bringing in revenue. I want to watch that we don't dilute a message or make a confused message. If the person is really going to manage grants that we already have and normally get, that's totally different than chasing.
Yeah, and I want to make sure, like, that was more, I think the bulk of it is going to be managing grants that we have right now, and then looking at it as far as sort of some of the temporary things that we do have since the flood is we've got 11 properties that are interested in elevation or buyout. Those all run through the town. That all takes town staff time to help with the application, to help with the answers to FEMA, and then to execute on that as far as doing the actual elevation.
Sure.
There's 2 emergency watershed protection grants right now that are, again, private properties, but it runs through the town. So that's more staff time to apply. So it's those types of things that like I just see in the last 12 months alone, those have piled up. So we need some help to kind of move through those. So I do view this as more kind of moving through those and less grabbing grants. I mean, other grants that have come in, I mean, there's various grants from like Conservation Commission or Transportation Committee that like, or ARPA and projects that are happening in the park. We need to like, how do we manage?
I'm not
So that I want to just be clear that I really wasn't proposing like we're going to go get 1 million new grants. Like we might get a few new grants, but that's not my main focus.
And that's my point about clear communication, and I think I would take that out of the communication, because that's not the expectations of this position. This position is to manage what you've got, and if the opportunity arises that way, I don't know if it's in the description, I didn't look.
Yeah, I
we
don't
were
think I
talking
put
about it.
new grants in there. I think it sort of got telephoned around here that it was going to be new grants, and
I think we kind of talked about it, but that wasn't.
Yeah,
was
my
not part of
intent
it.
is more manage things that we have on our plate already that keep coming in from various committees with, here's a new idea, here's a new idea, here's a new idea.
But more true that like those elevation grants and things like that, there's a 2% administration fee that gets paid directly to the town if you put it
That
in there.
does
So
help,
that
yes.
2% increase of, the 2% of the grant that you're going after sits in the town coffers. That is revenue, and you do need to report that revenue.
Yep.
And that would be a justification of that
Mhm.
for existing grants.
If there is some, yes, we could get payback in that sense.
From some of this.
So
I'm
I
sorry,
just wanted to make sure I understood it all, and I appreciate you clarifying that.
Thanks for the questions.
And I really think that, temporary basis that you guys are looking at doing is the way to go if you're gonna do anything, because going permanent without having it been a budget item is not the right way to go.
Right. Makes sense.
I think this is totally needed. I think it's gonna be a huge benefit. My only holdup is that we're gonna get ourselves in a bind where we come to rely on it, and then come budget season, we have to figure out what we cut. And I don't know, I don't saying that it doesn't warrant that. It's not an important thing, but I know a lot of schools and other, using one-time funds to create a ongoing commitment can get us in the
Maybe the
bind.
first
No,
job this person should have is just write down all the stuff.
Well,
we do and how to
yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
No, I
Yeah.
get it, but I think,
Yeah.
we're not gonna get there unless we try.
Right.
And
Also
worst
agree.
thing that happens is I'm in the exact same position a year from now that I am right now.
Yeah.
And if. the
But if we
if
let you see
position-
that the grass is greener, then you want to go back, Josh. So.
Well, on the upside, it's one.
But then we try to figure out other efficiencies and ways we can. We have the conversation about, well, if we lose that grant position, then here's some things that we're gonna lose. And we just,
Yeah.
we're not gonna be able to get to as much.
And having seen things start up where it's like 10 one-time temporary positions, and then there's this foofra as the money starts to run around.
Mhm.
It's really pilot. And so
Yeah.
where I was going earlier is thinking, so if we treat it as a pilot or test, and then at the end, 6 months from now, more or less, when we start budget discussions to say, is this worth doing? What's the return on investment? What's the productivity? What's the performance kind of thing?
Makes sense. So almost if we look at it as like getting a free trial period or
I think so.
a
A trial period.
non-contracted,
Yeah.
non-committed trial
Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
I think the key here is while you have the ARPA money, you definitely need those kinds of projects overseen. So, and the ARPA money can justify, if you're gonna use it from there, then your line item,
It's true. Yeah.
you're pulling in the ARPA money, so you're replenishing, so your net, you have an expense and a revenue coming in the same year, you might overspend on an expense, but you're gonna overbring in the revenue, so they could net each other.
It's a lot like mowing the grass.
Well, the other thing too is I think, Josh, I mean, every time I've walked into your office and Duncan too, you guys are so busy. And you want to keep you guys happy. And it's important to get help when help is needed. You're reaching out, you're asking for help. I personally think as a business manager, you take care of your staff.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the part-time temporary administrative assistant position as presented.
Is Bart, I second that?
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Bard. Any further discussion? I just want to throw my 2 cents in here. This has been brewing for years. When I first started on the board over 10 years ago, Jeff Urbanek many times said he had more work than he had availability to do it. He needed help. And we said, you need to hire somebody, you need to hire somebody, you need to hire somebody. And for various reasons, he would hire somebody, it wouldn't work out, it would fall back in his plate. He got burned out. And soon after Josh came on, he's like, how do I cram 120 hours of work into a 40-hour work week? I need help. And I feel that we haven't been honoring that request for help. So I feel really strongly that this is needed.
I do too.
I'm gonna ask something kind of off just because of something I observed a few months ago. And God love Duncan, but I see him with a can of wasp spray.
That's in his job description.
Well, yeah,
Are you serious? And I just went, what?
Other
are you
duties
doing,
as
love?
assigned.
And I said, what are you doing, love? And he goes, well, taking care of the wasp. And I'm thinking, don't we have someone to do that?
He
Yeah.
actually asked to be allowed to do that.
Did he?
No.
Hate wasp.
So that's.
I was am I seriously sorry? And I don't mean to be off, but I was like,
No, but
did you
that's,
just ask him to do this?
well, that's a good example about things like in this building that either me or Duncan or Linda just sort of jump on. So like, for instance, you saw a leak, yes, right
Well,
there.
I heard water.
So there's a
going.
leak, right?
Well,
It's
you guys were
another
doing that.
condenser unit. So I'm texting Duncan, hey, just so you know, we're gonna follow up with this in the morning. And he's like, oh my God, another town center issue. So whether it's a leaky air conditioner or wasps, certainly if there's an infestation of wasps, we'll call a beekeeper or something. But I think he thought, he's very industrious, like, oh, I'll just go
He's
spray that at
great.
night. But yeah, but it's
And
it's
I
those
checked
things
the
that just,
buckets, they're
they,
not full, so we're good.
okay. So they just, but yeah, a building like this every week.
Yeah.
There's something new that we're, whether
And
we
that's
whether we have to hire a plumber or we can tighten the bolt ourselves, we have to.
But it's
look
not
at each individual.
cost effective to have someone of that caliber doing those sort of jobs, is where I would say as a manager. That is not his expertise, and I just was shocked to see that.
But the problem is, where does it go?
That's the genesis of this. We can have somebody
Yeah.
who can do
Right.
clerical work and
then go
administrative
spray the
work,
wasps.
do all the.
And sprayer of wasps.
Maybe we should make that a new position. We got Ware of Coal.
Right?
I think we should assign it to the Wayer of Coal.
Yeah.
Viewer of wasps.
I'll do it,
No
man.
action.
We can have a whole committee of wasps.
Just stuck looking at you.
J.I.
Bart, I.
Adam, I.
David, I.
All right,
Consideration of moving the first select board meeting in September to Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024, due to the Labor Day holiday on Monday, September 2nd.
Bart, so moved.
This is J second.
Seems reasonable.
I said second.
I'm not ready for a vote.
Oh, yes, J.I.
Bart, I.
Adam, I.
David, I. Okay. Wow, it's 9:35 already.
Are we doing line 400?
yeah, no, it's 10:15. Oh, that's fair, sorry.
Oh, we've got how many
Gotcha.
purchase
Good
orders?
joke. Right over my
Got 6
sleeve, you had
purchase orders?
6 purchase orders, 6 or 5.
Well, we'll start with minutes. I'll start with a motion to approve the minutes of the June 3rd meeting.
Yeah, 6, you were right.
Is Bart so moved?
This is Jay second.
Thank you, Bart. Thank you, Jay.
I'll say aye, Lisa.
Oh, Adam, I went backwards.
Bart, aye.
Jay, aye.
David, I. Minutes of June 3rd have been approved. Let's do warrants before.
No, are you going to, well, some of the purchase orders apply to
Oh,
the
okay, we'll
warrant,
do that.
so I
one.
mean,
The purchase orders
if,
first.
if a purchase order fails, then we have to adjust the warrant.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I'll take a motion to approve purchase order 4799.
So this is for concrete on the East Main Street sidewalks to IMS, total number of $73,688.50.
So this is something that we did in-house with highway, saving significant money. This is the concrete.
Correct. So the only thing we're really subbing out is the material. And he did get quotes and IMS came in as the least quote, least lowest cost.
What number was that?
Purchase order is $47.99.
In an amount not to exceed 73,600 FF and 50 cents.
88.50 cents. Yeah, just for the record. It does look like F's. I could see that.
So Lisa, did you move that?
I could, I'm not looking at the right one, I guess, but,
It's up on the screen.
yeah,
It's easier.
that's probably easier to see.
Do we have a second?
I didn't move it, but yeah, I did move it. I move we approve that. 63, 69?
73, 688.50. So I need a second.
This is Bart, I'll second that.
Thank you, Bard. Motion made by Lisa, seconded by Bard. Calling the motion to a vote.
Jay, aye.
Bart, aye.
Adam, I.
Lisa, aye.
David, I. Next, we have purchase order 4801 to Heinsberg Sand and Gravel. This is for winter sand. We build that up over the summer.
3,041 tons. Wow.
Yeah.
This is Jay, I move that.
So total cost not to exceed $39,989.15.
Moved, I'll second.
So motion made by Jay, seconded by Lisa. Any discussion? Hearing none, calling the motion to a vote. Please identify yourself and signify your vote.
Jay, aye.
Bart, aye.
Adam, I.
Lisa, aye.
David, I. Next, we have purchase order 4900. This is to VLCT Passive Insurance. This is what, a quarter?
So this is for 2 quarters. So the second half of calendar year 2024, but it's in fiscal year 25. And so this is $64,154. It's split amongst 4 or 5 different departments for the insurance needs as depicted in the budget.
It's like it's most of everything except for health insurance and stuff, of course.
Yeah, so this is property casualty insurance, doesn't have, I think workers' comp is separate,
It's got workers' comp.
It says
Oh, sorry, I did have
Fire
workers' comp.
department assigned risk.
Yeah, right. So there you go. Property. Yeah, she listed it out. Thank you, Connie. Workers' comp. Yeah, it's right there. So
Yeah,
it is not
that
health
helps.
insurance. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So looking for a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve, purchase order 4900 to VLCT Passive for $64,154.
Thank you, Lisa. Do we have a second?
Adam, second.
Thank you, Adam. And again, this is for liability insurance and workers' comp. Calling the motion to a vote, please.
Jay, aye.
Bart, aye.
Adam, I.
Lisa, aye.
David, I. Motion passes. Next, we have a highway purchase order 4926.
So this is one that he usually puts in at the beginning of the fiscal year for gravel and aggregates. He's got a few different vendors that he goes to, but he usually needs to turn these around somewhat quickly to make sure that he's replenishing his stock in a timely fashion throughout the winter. So he'll usually call around to the vendors, figure out who's got the stock, who's got the sand in stock at the best price, and then moves quickly to get that delivered. So looking for approval of a purchase order to allow him to continue to follow that process throughout the winter.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve purchase order 4926 to various vendors for road materials and other things for $120,000.
Thank you, Lisa. Do we have a second?
Adam, second.
Thank you, Adam. So just for clarification, Pete does these jobs in the summer when weather precludes them from doing other things. So on rainy days, they're trucking sand and gravel to build up the winter stockpile. Uses these projects to fill in the schedule for things that can't be moved and creates holes in the schedule. So calling the motion to a vote.
Jay, aye.
Bart, aye.
Adam, I.
Lisa, aye.
And David, I. Okay, so this is the chloride for dirt roads.
Yeah, winter and summer, so you can use it in the summer to keep the dust down, and in the winter to
Keep the ice down.
the ice down. There you go. Dust
It's a
control and
purchase order.
salt free wet.
4927.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve purchase order 4927 to Innovative Surface Solutions for $14,999.43.
Second.
Okay, let's just amend the motion to make it 15,000.
Oh, sorry, the bottom is off my screen.
Second that.
Push it up 57 cents.
Yeah.
As a tip.
I think you just re-rounded it up and
It's,
assuming price changes or something.
Okay.
doesn't meet the smell.
At 57 cents, will cover it.
And you gotta make sure, yeah.
Okay, calling the motion to a vote.
Jay, aye.
Bart, aye.
Adam, I.
Lisa, aye.
And David, I.
Next one is FY 25 portion of summer property maintenance to mow and maintain. $12,000. And this is for grounds maintenance and mowing, Volunteers Green, Town Center, Front Church, Jericho Road, Greenway between the sidewalk.
I will just say before
Cemeteries.
calling this motion, or calling for this purchase order to be approved. All the feedback we've gotten from people concerning the mowing with mow and maintain has been very positive. People have gone out of their way to mention what a great job they're doing.
Right, in contrast to the years when it was really haphazard, these guys
Yes.
are doing a very good job.
Yes. Okay, so having said that, calling for a motion to approve purchase order 4973.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, I move we approve purchase order number 4973 to mow and maintain in the amount of $12,000.
Thank you, Lisa. Do we have a second?
Adam, second.
Thank you, Adam. Calling the motion to a vote.
Jay, aye.
Bart, aye.
Adam, I.
Lisa,
Lisa, aye.
And David, I.
And that takes us to the end of our purchase orders.
4,900, did we do that? Oh, yeah, sorry.
Now you just have the motion for the warrants.
So I'll entertain a motion to approve the warrants as presented.
Is Bart so moved?
Thank you, Bart. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Lisa. Motion made by Bart, seconded by Lisa. Any questions or concerns with the warrants? Hearing none, calling for a vote.
Jay, aye.
Bart, aye.
Adam, I.
Lisa, aye.
David, I. Items for next agenda.
Time-wise, I think there are likely going to be follow-ups from pedestrian safety from next week and that following week. A reminder, I told you two that I won't be here that night.
Yeah, where are you going?
James Taylor.
No, but where?
Spec.
Oh, okay.
And there is one that I was going to mention. We had a conversation about car share, and is there interest in car
Yes.
share? So it might not be the right time at the next meeting, maybe the subsequent meeting for car share. And maybe as the subsequent meeting, if it fits, I literally have had neighbors having another conversation about the speed limit and traffic on Tilden Avenue.
Really?
It's hard to believe this, but people take a turn on Baker. And by the time they get to the end of the street, what is that, about 200 yards? They're going over 40 miles an hour. And so the speed limit is technically 35, I think, because it's not posted otherwise. And it probably should be 25.
Residential area.
It's posted 25 probably. So anyway, it's a follow-up on that. And then somebody said, hey, and we should have speed bumps too. So this is the risk of having speed bumps. It's going to be like mumps. They're gonna be everywhere.
right. And the residents down at Mansfield Way where it meets Heinsberg Road.
Yes.
Continue to want us to lower the speed limit and put in giant truck eating jaws and so forth. And about we've done everything legally we can, other than increase patrols there. So you may have seen the email today.
Yeah, so the.
But other than saying we'll ask Chief Cambridge to patrol more down there, I don't know what else, what we haven't tried. But if we want to put the whole thing of speed enforcement on the agenda just to have people talk about it, we could.
I think it's speed limits and speed enforcements, because if I recall, it's 35 unless it's posted otherwise, and it has to be lower in an ordinance and also be posted lower. Is that correct? Do I remember correctly? And so there may be some other streets where people have similar things, you know, especially for these streets in town that are a block or two long, like
Yeah, that's surprising.
35 is kind of high. And for many of them that don't have sidewalks, I am sort of attuned to it because there's a crop of new young children, like 2 years old to 8 years old, who are in the road a lot.
Yeah, that's not good.
Go back on the road.
And it's a dead end road. Like there's no reason for people to be going 35 on that road. So.
Are we doing this tonight?
We don't have to go into executive session for that. I just wanted to kind of make a note of it.
So it might be a broader
I
question.
guess so. I mean, we could, here's the only concern. If we
Yeah.
put that on the agenda very broadly, we are going to talk about it for 95 minutes. Do you want to do that? Or do you want to try to like narrow it down to like a specific street or put it on there broadly and give a 10-minute overview of here's the process for speed studies. Here's what the traffic committee could do if they were here. Because the Face Corner, I looked at some of that reports today. We've done a speed study. We've lowered the speed limit.
Yeah.
There was a bike and trails pedestrian study that suggested a further study for how do you reshape the intersection, very similar to THBC. So there's not an easy, we can just do this at that intersection, especially. It's another study of what do we do? Then it would follow the same process as DHBC. Come to the select board. Here's what we can do. Here's how much it costs.
How about a narrow focus on the, what I think of as secondary streets in the village itself, like Brown's Court. And it might be like, maybe we should just have them all 25, you know, where they're a block long. Why should they be 35?
Yeah, but there again, I don't know what the process is for a
I know.
speed study on Tilden Ave.
I don't think you actually need one.
Oh, no?
Just put it in the.
I know there's certain you don't, but
My understanding is that we have authority over those, but that's,
well,
yeah.
we can, so if you want to talk, side roads and limit it to that, and then I think it's just gonna be, we put it at 20 minutes and we sort of keep it to 20 minutes because we.
And I think it really is maybe explain the process. If we want it posted and signed at 25, Chris Cole was, I understood him to be very clear about what the process was.
Yeah, and I think we should look at, I haven't looked at the ordinance to see.
For residential streets, I mean, in places, I've lived in 5 different states, and every one of the states had, residential neighborhood, which is defined 25. Yep. They didn't even justify it, but studies or anything else.
So we don't have to debate that now, but maybe have that like,
Yeah.
and
I think we can
that would
agree.
be a way of focusing it, so it's not every street everywhere.
Right.
And I only bring this up because you brought it up, but nobody knows this, but everybody should. The concrete bridge on Heinsberg Road, just this side of Faye's Corners, is the most structurally deficient bridge in the town of Richmond that will need attention soon. And
That's
I
why that car
imagine-
hit the house. in front of it.
Yeah.
I think, I'm not sure if I'm going to go on record as saying it's the most structurally deficient. I know that it's been on Pete's list of bridges we should replace because it's narrow and probably.
The one there
not
at Wild
right.
Apple.
That would be structurally.
You're talking about the one right before Face Corner.
Yes, Hill.
Where it narrows up
Face
right
Corner,
before you get to
concrete
Face
bridge.
Corner, like,
Right,
50 yards.
Wild Apple Lane comes into phase. Isn't that the first? Okay, I think I know
No,
one of these.
I know what you're thinking.
Bridge
You're
that
close.
slows everyone down because
That's
they're
actually-
watching your mirrors.
Mhm.
that's a good point. It's a traffic calming bridge.
It's coming.
I have an
That's a lot-
here right now.
that's a
'cause
lot like
Iceberg
the
sand and
station
gravel
too,
truck
that
came
they-
across the middle of that bridge.
Well, it's exactly, that's,
Yeah, it's pretty much the same
I
way.
view them very similar. The only, I think the problem with Face Corner is
Yeah.
car speed
Yeah,
and less,
gonna
and
slow.
like pedestrians, whereas THBC is more pedestrian. So, but the geometry is like identical.
So
Mr.
when that
Chairman,
bridge has to be replaced, there are drainage issues up there, and that would probably involve a realignment of the road to take out the 90-degree turn.
Yep.
In the intersection of Faye's Road.
Mr. Chairman, I move we adjourn. Second.
All those in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Aye.
Adjourned. Oh, aye.
Here, there's, in there is the ethics policies.
And now we
Heidi,
get to
thanks for
sign
staying to the
that
end.
first every meeting.
So.
Thanks for sticking it out.
Good job.